Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight we walk through the cold iron gates of America's most haunted cemeteries, where the earth never sleeps, and the dead still whisper through the cracks of their stone homes. These are 7 terrifying true cemetery horror stories, real encounters from graveyards that should have stayed silent. You'll hear of bells that toll in empty air, voices that call your name from beneath the soil, and shadows that stand between the graves even when you know you're the only one there. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear may follow you long after the story ends. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? And if there's a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name in the comments. Because once you step beyond these gates, not everything buried stays that way. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let's begin. I never thought I'd post about my job online, mostly because it's the kind of work people either joke about or ignore entirely. But I can't get this thing out of my head, and it's starting to bleed into the parts of my day that used to feel normal. I've been a night guard at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery for almost 6 years. When I tell people that, they usually ask about the Headless Horseman, and I smile and say the tourists get more excited about that than the locals. The truth is, most nights are quiet in the practical way that cemeteries are quiet. Wind hissing in the oaks, the Metro North Horn drifting across the Hudson, acorns tapping down through branches. You learn the closest streetlights buzz and the way your own boots sound after a mist, like you're stepping on soaked paper. You learn the difference between a raccoon in the leaves and a person hesitating behind a mausoleum. And if you stay long enough, your mind gets used to the fact that the names you read on marble in the dark are the same names the day visitors whisper about in awe. It becomes a town inside a town, and you are the one awake in it. I work the North Gate rotation with Miguel on Wednesdays and Thursdays, then solo Friday. Miguel is 10 years younger than me and a better listener than he lets on. He keeps his hair tucked under a navy cap and always brings a thermos with too much cinnamon in the coffee. He grew up in Yonkers, says the river calms him, and he hums old boleros when he's nervous. The first thing he asked me when he started was whether the statues really whisper after midnight. I told him we tell the rookies that to see if they'll quit during leaf peeping season. I didn't say that every guard ends up alone with a night where the wind gets complicated, and there's no manual for that. My sister Lily thinks I should get a day job. She works at the urgent care off Broadway and calls me on her walk to the bus, which lines up with my last rounds. She lights up a cigarette she never fully finishes and tells me about a kid with a sprained ankle, or a teacher who insisted her headache was a brain tumor. I tell her about the woman who leaves pennies on 3 specific stones every Tuesday, or the school group that took selfies with Irving's headstone and went quiet at the iron fence. She says as long as I'm careful and not letting ghost stories get into my bloodstream, she's okay. That was before the recording. That Wednesday in late October, the air smelled like rain that couldn't make up its mind. Leaves kept sticking to my boots, and the flashlight made everything look damp even when it wasn't. We'd had a few incidents that week, nothing dramatic. Someone had propped open the gatehouse side door with a brochure. Somebody else had left a half-eaten sub on a mausoleum step. And the motion camera near Section C kept tripping with what turned out to be a cat that looked like it had crawled out of a coal bin. The office printer had been spitting out the plot map with dark streaks, so I was carrying a laminated copy that felt too brittle in the cold. Miguel and I walked the routine together at 11, splitting at the fork near the Irving family lot. He took the path toward the brook and the old stones, and I looped uphill past the angel with her finger to her lips. I don't believe in signs, but I pay attention to patterns, and the silence that night wasn't the friendly kind. The river was low, and the usual chorus from the track sounded farther away. The lamp above the north gate flickered twice, then steadied. My phone showed 2 bars. I took a picture of the rusted hinge we'd meant to oil because it helped me remember to tell Rich in maintenance. When I was halfway along the ridge with the view of the church, I heard a sound like someone breathing into cupped hands, not loud. The soft kind of exhale you make when your glasses fog. I froze because breath carries differently than wind. I lifted my light and washed the beam across the grass. Squirrels sleep like rocks. Raccoons scuttle. Humans hold still. The sound came again to my right this time, from near a statue of a woman holding a book. It's one of those white marble pieces that draws moss and photograph kids in autumn. I swept the light, called out, and listened to the quiet bounce off the stones. It didn't bounce right. I called Miguel on the radio. He answered too quickly, which meant he was uneasy too. He said he had just seen a flashlight blink by the old Dutch church fence, but when he went closer, there was no one there. I told him to take the church loop twice and meet me at the iron bench. I don't like calling the police for a maybe, and I definitely don't like having to explain to a patrol car that our ghosts are compliant and don't carry ID. On the bench, I found 3 pennies stacked like a small tower, edges aligned. People leave coins everywhere, but I'd never seen them balanced that way. I took a picture and texted it to Lily with a joke about cemetery Jenga. She didn't reply. The breath sound came a third time, now behind me, close enough that I turned expecting to see Miguel playing around. No one was there, only the bench shadow stretching thin. My light haloed a thin thread of fog trailing low across the ground like steam from a kettle set too low. When I shined along it, it didn't scatter. It slid away like it was trying not to be seen. I found that to be the worst part about certain nights. You keep trying to fit the moment into categories your brain understands. Fog should behave like fog. Coins don't stack themselves. A breath has to have a mouth. The grid on my phone blinked from 2 bars to 1. I toggled the camera and hit record because it's 2020-something. And that's what we all do now. If nothing else, I figured, the audio would pick up the wind pattern so I could tell myself later it was nothing. I panned slowly from the bench to the statue, to the line of stones that stepped down toward the brook, to the iron fence where tourists like to take pictures of the shadows. The microphone picked up dry leaves. It picked up a tiny metallic click that I realized was my own key ring against my belt. It picked up the train horn, distant and layered in the way sound folds over the river. Then it picked up a whisper. Not a voice in my head. Not a rope pulling through a ring in the wind. A whisper low enough to make me step closer to my phone's screen, because my eyes thought that would help my ears. It said my name. Not the way my sister says it when she's mad. Not the way Miguel says it drawing out the second syllable. Not the way a stranger guesses it off a form. It was the way my late grandmother said it when I was a kid and she was telling me to listen. Daniel. Then a pause. Help. Then another pause, longer, with that soft, caught breath sound stuck in it. The last word came out shaped like a plea and a command. Please. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. The light swung wide and made a sad theater out of the trunks. My brain threw 100 answers at my body to keep it still. It's Miguel screwing around. It's a kid with a cheap speaker and a sense of humor. It's somebody's idea of a Halloween soundboard. The problem was the tone. There's a way people use your name that trips bone memory. I don't know how else to say it except that when that whisper reached for mine, I remembered the way my grandmother tied shoelaces. The radio crackled and I jolted like someone had clapped behind me. It was Miguel. He said he had a headache suddenly, and the air near the church smelled sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in a jar. He asked if I felt it too. I said I did and left out the part about the whisper. I told him to meet me by the Irving plot and we'd call it early. We started to move the same direction, both of us hearing the other's boots through the radio and feeling less alone than we were. I kept the phone recording and pointed the light toward the slope. I passed the angel with the broken finger and the small stone with a toy truck that someone always repositions even though it gets knocked over in wind. Every few seconds, the whisper slid under the sound of my breath on the audio, like an oar dipping in water out of sync. Daniel, help, please. I tried saying out loud, I hear you, and felt ridiculous and also a little ashamed because my voice came out thin. The 4th time it said my name, the sound wasn't ahead of me or behind me. It was under me, the way a live pipe hums. I stopped and looked down. The ground in Sleepy Hollow has textures you learn by season. This patch was darker. The grass gloomy with moisture, the soil a little lower like a soft bruise in the lawn. There was a headstone to my left with a last name I didn't know and a set of dates that fit a life. To my right, there was an older stone, letters shallow, the first name worn away. And directly in front of me was one of those temporary markers the cemetery uses when the stone isn't ready yet. A small metal plate on a stake, printed with a name in block letters and a date sharp enough to snag the breath. It wasn't my name. That would be too dramatic. And even writing this, I can't handle the thought of that. It was a name I recognized from a report months earlier, a John whose daughter had called twice to ask when the headstone might arrive. People don't always know how long these things take. There was a dry wreath at the base of the marker, bowed ribbon wilted into itself. I crouched and my knees cracked. The whisper pressed into my ear again, but my phone showed the audio input barely registering, as if the sound were happening on a frequency too soft to measure. The words were the same. "Daniel, help, please." The first time I said, "Where are you?" I felt stupid. The second time I said it, I ended up looking at the dirt in front of my boots like it would blink. When the reply came, it was the whisper's same voice without being a voice. It was the shape of a word arriving like a temperature change through the soles of my boots. "Here." My flashlight dimmed for a fraction and the lamp by the north gate buzzed an answer in the distance. The train horn sounded again, closer. One of those late-night runs where the cars are mostly empty and the conductor is thinking about breakfast. I lifted the phone and took a step back. The soil in front of me trembled the way water does when a truck brakes hard on a nearby road. I told myself the next thing as clearly as I could, the way you say a line to remember it during a test. If there is an animal burrowing, I am about to see dirt shift toward the edge. If there is a water pocket under the ground, I am about to sink an inch. If my mind is doing this, nothing is going to move and I can go home and sleep sitting up on the couch. The dirt didn't shift, it sank. Not like a hole, not like a collapse. Like the earth had taken a slow breath and let it out. A flattened space the size of my hand deepened by a thumb. My phone screen pulsed with some notification I didn't read. I thought of Lily saying my name like a warning. I thought of Miguel humming when he didn't know he was humming. That was when the whisper stopped being the only strange thing. The sound around me changed. It took me a few seconds to locate it because it didn't belong to air. It was a bell. Not a church bell, not a bike bell, not something modern you could point at and say that's the source. It was thin and old, metal against metal coming from the ground the way the whisper had. If you've never heard of safety coffins and burial bells, count yourself fortunate. People used to install ropes and bells to the surface in case someone was buried alive. We don't do that here now. The bell I heard had no rope and no surface. It rang once, then again, and the second ring sounded closer to my shoe. I said I'm going to get someone before my brain could decide which someone would come to a hole with a bell under it at midnight. Miguel's light swung over the hill like a slow lighthouse. He was walking too fast for the slope, breathing loud into the radio. He reached me, saw my face, and shifted his flashlight to the ground. We stood together like idiots staring at dirt. He said, "What am I supposed to be seeing?" And I said, "Listen." He tilted his head and we both heard it, that metal kiss. He backed up half a step. We both stood 3 inches taller without moving. That weird human instinct to make bones hard when you feel small. He whispered a prayer in Spanish. I said, "We're calling this in," and I meant maintenance, then EMTs if I could make my mouth say that. He nodded harder than the nod needed. We took 3 steps back in sync. It was then that the whisper came from the wrong place. Not the ground. Not the trees either. The phone in my hand. At least that's how it first felt. The vibration through the case before the sound. The audio track had been running since the iron bench and was still capturing nothing like it should. Now the speaker gave out a smear of noise and then my name again, but like my own voice had set it into a metal pipe and the echo came home broken. "Daniel. Don't have a good record of the next 30 seconds, because my brain hit some kind of safety limit and turned the moment into raw inputs without commentary. I know I moved my thumb and the recording stopped. I know I hit play from the beginning without meaning to. I know that the sound of my boots and the leaves and the train horn layered on top of themselves when the whisper came through the first time, and that the part I hadn't noticed in the moment now made itself clear. The whisper hadn't just said my name and help and please. It had paused after Daniel and then whispered a surname I share with my father, the way a clerk says it when they're not sure how to pronounce it. Then it said something else too, right before help. It said I am not him. The bell under the soil rang again, thin enough to be inside a person's mouth. I asked Miguel if he heard the name. He said he heard something, and that my face had gone so white it looked like one of the statues. He said we were done for the night and reached for the radio to call Rich, his voice steady in the way people sound steady so they won't throw up. We marked the plot number. We took pictures we both knew would look like nothing in daylight. We waited under the lamplight until Rich pulled up with his jacket half on. He's a practical man who can fix a hinge with a paperclip. He examined the ground, found nothing wrong he could touch, listened to a sample of the audio, told us to go home and sleep, and said he'd walk the area at dawn to see if animals had undermined the sod. The next day I woke up with the shape of the phone in my palm even though it wasn't there. I made coffee too strong and it still tasted like the dirt smell that gets into your mouth on damp nights. I sent the audio file to Lily without explanation, because I knew that if I tried to explain, I'd start making jokes and the jokes would become my version of the truth. She called me before the end of the clip. She didn't make jokes. She said a long drawn-out okay and then asked if I was safe. I told her yes. She asked if anyone had died lately with our last name. I said surely someone somewhere had and immediately regretted saying it like that. She said come by the clinic for lunch. I said I would and didn't. That evening, Rich texted to say they'd inspected the area and found nothing unstable, that the temporary marker had been slightly crooked and he had set it straight, that there was a small pocket of air under the sod that didn't seem unusual. He asked if I wanted to switch to the earlier shift for a while. I said no, and the answer surprised me. Friday night, I walked alone with the radio turned up higher than usual. My light made solid tunnels and I stayed inside them like a rule. I didn't go near the plot right away. I made a slow loop and checked the gate, then circled back when my legs stopped trying to outrun the clock. At the bench, the pennies were gone. At the statue with the book, someone had set a flower, the kind you buy at a gas station when you are sorry and tired. The river smell was back to normal. I could hear Route 9 carrying late people home. When I reached the plot, I expected silence because the thing about Thursday nights is they eat the magic of Wednesday. Rights never feel the same twice. I lifted the light and let it fall on the small metal marker. The printed name was the same. The date had not changed. The ground in front of it looked as ordinary as anyone could want. My body did the dumbest thing. It relaxed, and in relaxing it let something in. I don't know how else to say that without sounding like one of those posts where the narrator wants to scare you on purpose. My knees eased, and I let out a breath I might have been holding since Wednesday. And in that empty space, the whisper arrived without sound. It didn't use my ears. It bounced inside the shape of my name in my head and asked again the only thing it seemed to know to ask. Help. The bell did not ring. The dirt did not move. The lamp did not flicker. My phone was in my pocket with the camera turned off. None of the easy tells were there. I took the phone out anyway because I am apparently not very bright and because that's how you prove to yourself something is nothing. I opened the recording app and it showed me a list of files. I clicked the one from Wednesday and the little waveform began its slow river across the screen. I held the speaker toward the ground like a fool. The minute mark came. The train horn. The leaves. The whisper. The pause after my name where the surname had nested. When it came this time, I heard it. It wasn't just my last name. It was my last name spoken in the cadence of our family when we argued gently in kitchens. It was my father's voice softened by time, saying my name the way he used to when I came home late from the deli job and he was too tired to be angry. I am not him, the whisper said again. And for reasons I can't make tidy, that sentence was what undid me. I don't have a clean ending. Miguel stayed on nights, but he refuses to walk that ridge alone. Lily told me if I start talking to the floor when I come over, she's making me see someone. Rich oiled the hinge and replaced the motion camera by Section C. The temporary marker was gone last week, replaced by a proper stone. The name is carved deep and true and looks like it will last longer than I will. The bell doesn't ring in the ground there. It rings in my head sometimes when I'm reading the log or cleaning the flashlight lens. I tell myself it's because I'm tired, because sleep at odd hours does things to you, because sound memory is a trickster. The file still lives on my phone. I've tried to delete it twice. The first time my thumb hesitated and I told myself that was me being sentimental about a weird job. The second time the screen froze, and when it unfroze the app had closed and a text from an unknown number sat there like a stone, where you don't expect a stone. It was a blank message containing a map pin for the cemetery's north gate and a timestamp set 5 minutes into the future. I didn't go. I sat in my car 2 blocks away and watched the bus stop at flicker between a brand of toothpaste and a Broadway show I will never see. I thought about the way the whisper used my name and how much I hate that I recognize the note in it. The shape of a person asking for help in a voice that isn't allowed to be loud. I keep telling myself that if it wanted to hurt me, it would have found a simpler way. Sometimes I stand at the fence after my shift ends and I wait for the train to come over the river. The horn folds through the dark and I can pretend that sound explains the rest. Lately, there's a new habit I can't shake. When I do my last walk, I stop by that plot without telling myself I intend to. I say the names I read out loud, quietly so they keep being names and not just letters on stone. When I reach the one that used to be a temporary plate on a stake, I say it too and add mine after it. I say both names like I'm answering roll call. It makes me feel a little stupid and a little better at the same time. Sometimes a wind comes through like a hand brushing away dust, and some nights there's nothing at all except the river lying awake with me. Last night the pennies were back on the bench too, this time not stacked but placed side by side like eyes. I left them there. On my way out I clicked the gate shut and the hinge didn't squeal. I put my phone in the glove box so I wouldn't be tempted to listen again. Halfway home at the light by the diner, the glove box rattled like something inside needed air. I told myself a pen had rolled and hit the latch. When I got home, Lily had left me a voicemail I let play twice. She said she'd dreamed of our father and woke up with his name in her mouth, which she said was nothing because that's how dreams are. Before she hung up, I heard her take a breath, the kind you make when you're about to ask for help and decide not to. I stood in my kitchen and stared at the dark window that kept showing me back myself. I don't care if anyone believes me. I care that the whisper keeps getting the easiest part right, the part where my name makes me come to the door. I have a shift tomorrow. I'll walk that ridge again because the living have roots and the dead have patience. If you visit in the day, you won't see anything. Leave a penny if you want. If you hear a bell in your head later that night that you can't shake, do me a favor and say my name out loud like you're checking attendance. If something answers, pretend it's the train. If it says it isn't who you think it is, pretend you misheard. I'm not sure what happens if you don't. I've told parts of this to friends in bars and on late drives, but I've always left out the worst of it. Maybe I didn't want to see it in writing. Maybe I didn't want to give it shape. Tonight the noise from the street is thin and the air feels like it's pressing through the window screens, and I'm tired of waking at the exact same minute with the taste of wet oak in my mouth. I want to put this down and see if that helps. If you know Savannah, you know how it looks at night when the moss hangs in the stillness like gray hair and every porch light is a small island. I grew up not far from here, left for a while, and came back to work freelance photography jobs and general odd gigs. That's where this starts. A job I almost turned down because it sounded like a tourist trap with better lighting. My friend Maya found it. She does voiceover work for ghost tours. The kind where you sit in a trolley with screens and speakers and get told how many people died on this corner. We were eating boiled peanuts on her back steps when she read the email to me. A podcast wanted a mini documentary about local cemetery lore. They had a grant. The producer was the host's cousin. It was that kind of project. You've got the voice for a quiet kind of story, Maya said. And I can do the folklore part. We split the money and get some press. I told her I wasn't into jump scare stuff and she laughed and said I'd be running the smallest, gentlest ghost operation in the city. You'll have to shoot at night, she added. Bonaventure at midnight. Think you can handle that? I knew Bonaventure, everyone in town does. The way the oak branches arch into ribs, the statuary with the soft faces on humid mornings, the way the river blurs at the edges out past the bluff. When I was a kid, my Aunt Jo took me there with a sketchbook. She told me to be respectful, like I was walking into someone's living room. We'd whisper without thinking about it. A lot of my photos live in soft light. I do porch portraits in empty rooms and those washed-out colors you get after a storm. I said yes to the job because the money would cover a new lens, and because I trusted Maya to make a story that felt like a memory instead of a prank. Also because the email mentioned the light. Every city has its one sentence it says about itself over and over. Savannah's is that it is beautiful and it is haunted. Locals claim a glowing mist drifts between the oaks near midnight. If you follow it, they say, you'll find footprints pressed in the grass leading straight to your own reflection carved into stone. If that sounds like it came from a tour guide with a headset, you're not wrong. Still, enough people said it like it was a real thing that you felt foolish dismissing it out loud. The email was short. We're looking for a quiet exploration of the Bonaventure light. Interviews with locals, night audio if possible. No sensationalism, that sealed it for me. No fake bangs, just noise and breath and trees. We'll take turns holding the boom, Maya said. I'll talk to people during the day. You'll get the night stuff. The third person in this story is Leland. He was the groundskeeper, or one of them. Late 60s, tall and thin and bent in a way that made you think of someone who had lived his life carrying awkward things. He wore a soft cap and 2 shirts no matter how hot it was. His eyes seemed colorless until he looked straight at you, and then they were a washed-out blue that you could see had once been sharp. He found us signing the paperwork at the office before the gates closed. You hear about that light, he said, not a question. Maya nodded. He nodded back and watched her checkboxes. Don't wander past the low stones by the bluff, he said. I don't like to pull people up from there. And don't chase things if they look like they're leading you. Stay on paths. Maya asked him if he believed in the light. He shrugged. Belief is a kind of rope you tie to something so it doesn't float off. I've seen things, he said, but you don't need me to make up your mind. We went 3 nights. The first night was reconnaissance. I brought a small recorder, my camera, 2 batteries, a headlamp, and a flashlight I keep in my glove box that's older than I am. Maya brought the boom and a thermos of very sweet tea that went room temperature by 11. The humidity was a blanket. You could feel it sitting on your skin. The crickets were loud, and there was that thready sound magnolias make when their leaves move against each other, even if there's no wind to do the moving. We walked the main path under the live oaks and spoke quietly into the mic about the layout, the dates on the stones, the angel with the chipped fingers. I kept checking my watch because I didn't want midnight to arrive and pass without me noticing. I don't know why that sounded like a rule, but it did. If anything was going to happen, it would punctuate on a 0 and a 0, like a story that knows it's being told. I started to notice the lights people left. Small votives in jars, solar-powered flowers that glowed thinly with stored sun, a few actual candles still guttering a bit in glass, left by someone who trusted no one to knock them over. The heat held the smell of smoke low. Every now and then you get flash at the edge of your vision that turns out to be a bug wing catching the headlamp beam, and your heart throws a small punch. More than once I put my camera up, thinking I saw a pale blur move between stones and got nothing but bareness and my own hand half in frame. "We could fake it," Maya whispered once, and I said, "Please don't." Maya never fakes. It was a joke, the kind you make to deflate yourself. The first night ended when my shirt clung like I had forgotten how to sweat until then, and Maya admitted her feet ached. We stood at the gates with our night eyes gone wide and the streetlights outside making ordinary amber circles. Leland had come back for a check before his shift ended. He asked if we got anything good. I said we got sound, and he said sound is honesty, which made me like him. He asked if we'd be back, and I told him we had 2 more nights scheduled. He looked at the air over my shoulder, then past the gates at the road and said, "Don't let it take the shape you bring with you." I didn't understand him then. I think I do now. On the second day we interviewed people. Maya talked to a woman who runs a vintage store on Congress who said her cousin saw the light when he was 13 and now won't sleep with his bed facing a window. We met a cop at the corner diner who said he has to chase kids out at night and hears laughter that doesn't match the number of bodies running. Aunt Jo made us coffee and told us the old story about the statue who cries when it rains even if she's under a roof. We got the good stuff too, the practical things that make a story stick. The grounds contract that says no overnight vigils, a city historian who rolled her eyes and then said of course she knows someone who saw it. And yes, it was always around midnight. And no, she wouldn't say their name. Everyone has a cousin who has a friend. No one wanted to be the friend. The second night we went later. It was a Monday. The air was no cooler. There were fewer mosquitoes for some reason, or maybe I'd just covered myself better. The sound was heavier, the way a room feels when the other people leave and you hear your own breathing like a separated track. I brought 1 more battery and a second handkerchief. Maya brought saltines and left a small handful on a stone because her abuela says you shouldn't go into anyone's home without bringing food. She said it casually to the mic, and the crunch of the crackers under her hand sounded too loud to me. "Shh," I said reflexively, and she laughed. "You shh," she whispered, and for some reason that felt like a spell breaking. We made ourselves small again. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden drop in temperature or chorus of voices. It was the crickets going quiet in a seam that unzipped across the grass. A silence unrolled, and you could feel it move past your ankles like cooler water in a creek. It didn't swallow all the sound. It took the insect layer and left the tree leaves. Only now you could hear leaf against leaf like paper folding in another room. I touched the mic cable because I wanted to be sure our gear hadn't gone out, and felt the small buzz of electricity through the line. The recorder level still showed the needle flirting with the middle. Maya blinked at me. Her eyes do this thing where they flash wide when she's about to make a joke. But there was no flash now, just a slower blink, and then she pointed. There was a whitish blur 10 yards ahead that I first assumed was someone's breath in a beam of light. Except we weren't breathing hard and our lights were pointed at the ground. This wasn't a ball or a perfect shape. It was a thinning of dark. I don't have a better way to say it. A curtain in the air when a door opens somewhere else. You don't see a face in something like that. You don't see a body. You see light where it isn't supposed to be. I lifted my camera and my hands shook. The shutter sounded like a hammer. I took 3 shots. Maya whispered into the boom that I'd better be getting this. I whispered back that if the file corrupted, I'd eat my own lens. We both smiled the way you smile if you're convincing a dog not to bolt. The light slid between 2 stones and then along a low hedge. It didn't float like in movies. It moved like a person who knew where to put their feet. I can't explain that either. The crickets along its path went quiet in a ribbon. It turned left where the path turns right and passed into grass that grew slightly taller. We stayed on the path because of Leland's don't chase things rule, but the light kept moving. We followed at a distance like we were tailing someone who might take a corner fast. I kept the camera up until my shoulders burned. That's when we saw the footprints. Not wet, not muddy, not compressed in a way that would make a deep shadow. They were just darker, like where someone has been standing still too long. 2 ovals, then 2 ovals, then 2. Bare feet, I think, though I won't swear it. They led from the edge of the path into the tall grass, and if I got down on my knees, I could see the way each one sat lower than the ground around it by a thickness the camera wouldn't catch. The light kept going. The prints stopped. I wanted to step into them just to see if they were thistle-free, the way you step into a friend's footprints on a beach. Instead, I leaned closer and put 2 fingers on one. The grass felt warm. We stayed still there until the light went behind a second hedge and its absence pulled the crickets back on like someone plugging something back in. Maya let out a breath and it sounded like something had been using up all the air and decided to share. "You got that," she said, her voice too loud to my ears, and I said I didn't know what I had. But something had gone through the air in front of us. We hadn't followed. We had stayed where we were supposed to be. We had done the right thing. We wove the cable and wrapped the mic and walked back toward the gate with our hands intermittently elevated in front of us, like people who have just felt their way through a basement. Leland waited by his truck. He watched us without moving. "Saw it," he said. It wasn't a question. "We saw something," Maya said. He nodded. "It doesn't care what you call it. I didn't sleep well that night. My phone kept lighting its screen for no reason, and when I checked, there were no notifications. My neighbor's cat cried in the hall outside my apartment and then went quiet the instant I put my hand on the knob. I woke at 3:14 with my mouth dry and the taste of tea. It felt like a broken appointment. I don't know how else to put that. A minute I was supposed to meet kept walking past my door. On the 3rd day, the producer asked for a teaser. We sent a minute of Maya talking about oak canopies and the sound of wind with the crickets cutting out in that sudden seam. He wrote back 1 sentence. "If you get the reflection part, you have the story of the season." It made my stomach go heavy in a way that had nothing to do with food. I didn't want to go back because a stranger wanted a better clip. I wanted to go back because if there was a shape to this thing, I needed to know it. Maya wasn't sure she could come the 3rd night. She had a shift that might run long. I told her I could manage sound and camera if I kept it simple. She made me repeat Leland's rules to her like she was my mother on my first solo drive. "Stay on paths. Don't go past the low stones by the bluff. Don't chase what looks like leading." She added her own. "Bring a second flashlight even if it's dumb. Tell me if you stay later than 12:30. Don't linger if you feel watched." I promised. She told me to text a picture of my car when I parked so she'd know I was there. I did that. The streetlight made a circle that ate half the hood into shadow. My hand looked pale in the sudden flash. It's funny, the small things that stick. The 3rd night, the air smelled faintly of creosote from a railroad tie, or a fence someone had tarred. There was an owl much closer than the previous night, so close I nearly ducked out of instinct. I knew the layout now and let my light skim rather than dig. The recorder felt warm against my chest where it sat in its harness. My breath sounded bigger without Maya beside me. I said out loud for the recorder that I was returning to the spot where we saw the light and the footprints, that I was alone, that I wasn't planning to spend long. I said it like someone leaving a note. The phrase "plan to spend long" echoed in my head, wrong somehow. Planning it implies control. That's what the 3rd night took from me, the idea that I had any part in the timing. It was 11:53 when the first seam of quiet began. I checked because some stubborn part of me wanted to beat the midnight cliché. The silence unzipped again. I stopped and lifted my light, and there it was, that thinning of dark moving at the height of a person's chest. It went slightly faster this time. It didn't follow the hedge line. It crossed an open patch and the crickets swiveled their quiet to make a small path. I took 3 steps back so I wouldn't be tempted and then held as still as I could and counted in my head to keep myself from walking. 1, 2, 3. The light veered left, toward the older stones. It passed through a sudden patch that smelled like freshly cut stems. Without meaning to, I took 1 step. I stopped. I made myself say a word out loud so I'd hear the shape of it. No, I said. It was ridiculous. It helped. I let my light go to the ground and swept it in a slow half-moon. That was when I saw the footprints again. They weren't exactly where they were before. They were closer to the smaller stones, the ones with names eroded into shapes like remembered handwriting. They led from the path and then fanned out, as if someone testing the ground with different length steps. I should have turned around. I should have taken that as a sketch of instruction. This is how people get lost. This is the map of it. Instead, I stepped along the inside edge of where they had been. Not in them. A kind of parallel walking. It felt like holding my breath. There is a low fence at the edge where the ground drops toward the bluff. It's not meant to keep anyone safe. It's a reminder. Past it, the grass thins and the sand reminds you the river is close. A few stones sit there because the ground is older than any boundary. The light moved into that corner and every brain cell I had screamed about Leland's warning. And I stopped as if someone had put a hand on my chest. The light didn't slow. It reached the farthest of the low stones and then dimmed to nothing like someone cupped it in 2 hands. The seam of silence stayed, which made it worse. If the sound comes back, you know the thing is done. If the sound stays gone, you are in it. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya asking for a check-in. The timestamp was 12:01 and seeing the ones and the zeros felt like being mocked. I wrote I'm fine and my fingers forgot how to spell fine and I had to backspace twice. When I looked up, I saw the first reflection. It wasn't supernatural. It was a glossy stone catching my light. The surface hadn't dulled yet the way a lot of the older pieces do. For a second, I thought someone had polished it for a grave that still gets flowers. I turned my light away so I wouldn't be disrespectful, and when I did, the white shadow of my face skated over the dark sheen and slid away. It made me feel rude, like I had been peeking in a window. I told myself to leave. Then my own head made an argument I should have recognized as bad thinking. The podcast wanted the reflection piece. If there was a way to record the way a person's face looks on stone with crickets gone, and the river pushing thick air into the hollows, maybe people would feel the thing without seeing it. I told myself 5 seconds, 10 at most. I raised the recorder and set it on the edge of the fence post. The red light blinked calmly. I angled my headlamp just high enough to give me a little bounce and stepped closer. There it was again. My face not as a mirror, but as a shape overlaid on the names. My hair looked like a cloud and my forehead looked too big and the angle made one eye a little smaller than the other. It was a bad likeness, like when you catch yourself in a window and think that isn't what I look like. I went closer. I read the names and said them out loud because Aunt Jo taught me to do that and it felt like a way to keep the world stitched together. I said the birth years and the death years and the words, husband and wife and beloved and infant son, and I felt the soft skin at the base of my skull prickle. I told myself it was because I was being sentimental. I told myself a lot of things. Beyond that stone was a taller one whose top curled like the edge of a scroll. I know that shape. It's common here. The surname was long and double-barreled, and I couldn't tell if it was one person or a family marker. My light skimmed and caught carved leaves and something like a ribbon. I angled the beam up and that was when I stopped speaking because my tongue felt heavy. At the center of the scroll was a smooth oval the size of a door peephole, not an inset, not a photo space. A polished hollow where the carver had made a place for eyes to rest. When the light hit it, it brightened like water. I didn't see myself at first. I saw another oval, deeper within, like looking into a bowl. Then my headlamp, tipped just a degree and a face slid into place and it was mine. Only the plane of it seemed wrong, like a traced version of me that someone had copied not from memory but from the pattern my face makes when I doubt myself. The mouth looked like the one I have when I'm about to say I don't mind. The eyes looked like the ones I get when I'm trying not to be the first to turn away. My face in stone felt like someone had taken the worst 6 seconds of me and pressed them into a surface that doesn't wear fast. I stepped back without meaning to. My heel brushed something that didn't give like grass and I flailed, and my light went left, and the reflection went with it in a smear. I put my hand on the stone to steady myself, and the chill of it came through my palm in a way that felt like it wasn't temperature so much as attention. I snapped my hand away. My phone buzzed again, and I didn't look. I looked instead at the curve of the letters under the oval, the family name, and then 3 given names and dates I couldn't make sense of because my light was skittering a little. I swallowed and tasted tea again. I took a breath and brought my light steady and read. One name, then another, then the third. The third was mine. The first name exactly. The middle initial, nothing like my own, which made my brain try to fix it. The last name, not mine. The date had no death year, only a hyphen like a string waiting to be tied. You know how you lean in when you're sure you're misreading? You go closer, not to be close, but to be right. I went close. My light bounced, off the oval and across my face and the face on the stone's face. And at that exact fussy angle, the mouth of the face on the stone seemed to move like it does when a cloud moves across the moon. It didn't change shape. It changed emphasis. I made the kind of sound you make when the temperature of a pool surprises you. Behind me, the seam of silence moved. You wouldn't think a lack of sound could move. It did. It came up behind me at knee height like a cool animal and went left. The crickets on my right jumped back to life, then went quiet again as the seam passed. I lifted the recorder and the red light blinked once and then steadied. I could feel my pulse in my tongue. I whispered my name into the mic. I said it twice as if repeating would make it less odd on the stone. The first time it sounded like I was saying it around a mouthful of air. The second time it sounded normal. The third time I didn't say it because my phone's lock screen lit and the numbers said 1201 and then blinked to a blank and came back and said 1201 again, which would be stupid if it didn't match every story I'd heard and rolled my eyes at. I tapped the glass and it didn't react like glass. It felt like tapping the hood of a car that hasn't been driven in a long time. Hey, someone said behind me. And this is where I get told I'm making it up because it's such a neat trick. It wasn't the voice of a ghoul or a movie devil or my dead grandmother. It was Maya saying hey the way she does when she wants me to look at something small. It came from behind me and to my left at a distance that suggested she was half hiding. I turned so fast my ankle popped, and of course there was no one. The hedge was closer than I thought, and it smelled without being something I could name. I said Maya out loud, and my voice did not trigger an answering hey. I said Leland, which was stupid because I knew he'd gone home, and the sound went into the seam of silence and came back thinner. When I turned back to the stone, my face on the oval had its mouth closed, and the taste of tea went metallic like coins. The footprints reappeared then. I didn't see them emerge as if being pressed. I looked at the ground, and there they were, a few feet beyond the low fence. Slightly darker, slightly lower. They went in a short line away from the stone and then curved back toward where I stood. And this time they continued. They led up to the exact point where the toes would meet the fence. I aimed my light past that line, and the grass looked normal. I aimed it back, and the prints going away looked normal. It was only the set coming toward me that held. I thought of Leland's phrase about belief being a rope, and I thought of Aunt Jo reading names to keep the world stitched together, and I thought of what the producer wanted to hear in his headphones, and I made the mistake of looking back up at my name. The hyphen had a tiny dot at the end now, like when your pen slips. I can't prove that. It's one of those details my mind could have made because it loves patterns. The date still had the birth and the blank and the tie. The middle initial was still wrong. The surname was still a stranger's. I didn't move. I told myself that if I moved, my heel would hit the fence and that would make a sound and the seam would stitch shut and everything after would change and I would regret it or not, but I would know I had done it. I counted to 5 again. I made myself say softly that I was leaving and that I was sorry for being careless and that I appreciated the quiet. I don't know why I said appreciated. It felt better than thanks. When I stepped back, my boot heel made no noise at all against the low fence. It should have made a squeak or a click or a scuff. It made the sound my mouth makes in a dream when I try to yell. The seam of silence didn't move. It was just there, a steady absence. I tipped my light down and saw that the footprint closest to the fence had moved a fraction, not deeper, forward. It was shadow where shadow hadn't been a breath before. I could have measured it with a fingernail. That small. I did not bend to check. I did not step again. I reached back without taking my eyes off the oval and fumbled for the recorder, and my fingers found only strap, then wood, then air. I looked. The recorder sat where I'd left it, but the red light didn't blink now. It held red steady, so steady it felt like a held breath. I shut my light off. I don't know if that was smart or not. Without it, the stone's oval still held a faint pallor, like a drop of milk in deep coffee. My face was no longer clear in it. It was a shape that could have been anyone's. That helped for a second. Then it felt worse, like losing a piece of evidence that might have convinced me there was nothing special about this. I stood there in that dim and listened. No crickets, no wind, no gear hum. Somewhere far off, a car hissed on wet road and the sound folded itself up before it reached us. The air smelled like cut stems again. I turned the light back on. I stepped sideways rather than back. I kept the fence against my leg so I'd know where I was in the dark part of the green. The footprints didn't move, or I couldn't tell if they did. They ended at the fence, and then there was nothing. When I crouched to lift the recorder, the red light blinked once as my fingers closed around it and then went steady again, and in that blink I heard, not with my ears but inside the bone near them, a small rush-like breath over the top of a bottle. It wasn't language. It was the shape a word might make if it forgot what it meant halfway through. Leaving was work. The silence stayed beside me until I passed the hedge. It peeled away then, and let the crickets fill how they liked to, all at once, like relief. My legs shook when I got to the gravel, and the way the stones under my boots cackled felt like laughter at my expense. I texted Maya from the gate. I sent a picture of the road. She called, and I didn't answer because I didn't want to say any of it into air that wasn't there with me. I drove home with the headlights aiming too low because the load in the back was heavier than it was. And when the road dipped, my stomach did that slow drop you get on the first hill of a small roller coaster. I made myself listen to the recording before I slept. The first half hour is ordinary night. I hear myself whisper. I hear the owl. I hear my shoes and the little shake in my breath when the seam starts. Then the quiet comes down in the speakers the way a lid goes onto a jar. The meter doesn't drop. It gathers the sound of quiet like cloth. I hear myself read the names and the birth years. The breath holds when I say mine. And I put a finger on the pause button and didn't traffic with it. I let it run. Here is the part I wish I could upload straight to you so you could have the choice to turn it off. After I say I appreciate the quiet, there is a space you could park a truck in. In that space, if you raise the volume, if you lie on the floor and press the headphones around your ears, if you decide you want to hear, you will hear footfalls in grass. They are not mine because you can hear my breath quick and small close to the mic. These steps are heavy in the way of measured care, the way you walk if you do not want to snap a twig. They come up to the fence and stop. In the next space is the bottle breath sound, and then layered under the hush of everything not speaking, you will hear myself say my name very near to my own ear. It isn't a playback. It isn't the earlier take leaking through from a speaker. It's the way your own voice sounds when you say your name while someone else is using your mouth. I didn't turn it off. I let it run to the end. The crickets come back in that instant switch. My whisper comes out like a cough. I pick up the recorder. The rest is footsteps on gravel and my car door and the ugly throat clearing of my engine. I saved the file as Night 3, and then I named a copy of it Do Not Listen because you should label the things you can't trust. I tried to be practical. The next morning I went back in daylight and made myself walk to the stone. It's different in the morning. The trees seem less interested. People are around, and you can hear an actual conversation rather than the suggestion of one. I carried flowers for a grave without flowers because showing up empty-handed felt wrong. I read names again because if I didn't, I would turn into someone who avoids corners. When I reached the scroll stone, it looked like all the others of its kind. The oval still held a shine. When I leaned in, I saw my face as you see it in any reflective thing, distorted by the curve. The names were the same, and the third one was still a stranger's surname with my first name and the wrong middle initial. Then the hyphen in space, and nothing else. The dot I thought I'd seen on the end of the hyphen was not there. I had made it, or it had not needed to persist in daylight. That thought made me have to rest my hand on the fence for a minute. Leland stood on the path behind me like people who know where to stand so as not to startle you. "You don't chase at night," he said. "Daytime's for trying to understand." I asked him if the names on stones change. He told me stones change slower than people, but not as slow as people think. Edges soften. Moss comes, lines blur, he said. Some of it's what you bring on your eyes. I asked him if he ever saw his own face in one. He said everyone sees what looks back at them. "You look long enough at anything that can take a shape," he said. And he ran a cloth over the top of the stone like he was taking dust off a shelf. "You don't get to decide which shape it prefers." We turned to find the footprints, and there were none, of course. Just grass and sugar ants making loops around their lives. He asked if I was done going at night. I told him we had enough for the piece. I told him I thought that was true. He nodded and said, "Most people come for the light and leave with their own face. The light is honey. Your face is bread." It sounded like something from a lullaby and made no sense until hours later when I heard the recording again and understood how the quiet made space for what you bring with you to spread. I thanked him and he said, "Don't say thank you," and I said sorry instead. Because Aunt Jo says the dead don't like thank you, and I didn't want to be rude to any part of the place that could hear me. We cut the piece together in 2 days. The producer loved it and made us cut out the part where my own name shows up because he said it felt too on the nose. He wanted a suggestion. I kept the file with everything in, the way you keep a photo where a stranger didn't move out of your frame fast enough. The episode went live and people wrote saying they heard the footfalls, and people wrote saying we faked it because you can fake anything. Maya and I went to dinner to pretend it was over. She told me she was proud of doing a ghost story that didn't scream. She asked me if I'd go back for a follow-up piece in the fall when the air sits different. I said yes because I'm not smart. It's been 2 weeks. I tell myself the smell in the mornings is the new mulch in the neighbors' beds. I tell myself the cat walks our hall because there's a draft there that makes it feel like a tunnel. I tell myself 1201 is not a trap but a coincidence. I tell myself the second flashlight is on the chair by the door because I forgot to put it away. The recorder sits on my table with the red light dark and the battery removed. It catches my eye the way a glass catches your eye if you think you left a thumbprint on it. At least once a day I find a dampness under my palm like I've put my hand down on cold stone. I don't own stone tables. Last night I woke at 12:01 again and went to drink water and looked into my oven door because the kitchen light was behind me. And for a second the reflection was that oval version of me. It was nothing. It was a warped surface. I wiped the glass with the dish towel and the smear of my face went away. Then it seemed to be on the towel. I am not sleeping well. I keep thinking about footprints that end at a fence. You can go under or over, but you can't go through. I used to like signs like that. Boundaries felt honest. Now when I see the low chain at the edge of a lawn or the way a curb breaks to ramp at the corner, I find myself looking for the dark ovals of somebody's careful steps. I haven't gone back at night. I've told myself I will when it's cooler, when it's not a full moon, when Maya can come, when I think straight. It feels like agreeing to a fourth night is a kind of shallow breathing I don't want to do. I tell you this because the last detail won't leave me alone. I went to Aunt Jo's to bring her groceries, and she had pulled out an old box of photos for me to scan. She needed someone with a steady hand and the patience to keep edges straight. The pictures smelled like powdered sugar in old envelopes. I made neat stacks. When I got to one from my aunt's undergraduate days in front of a stone somewhere I couldn't name, I saw my first name written in pen on the back. It wasn't me. It was a roommate who shared my first name. Her middle initial was the one carved on the scroll stone. Her last name is the double-barreled family name on the wide stone before it. The date on the back was the year before I was born. I set the photo down and found I had put my hand on my throat like I'd been surprised while swallowing. Aunt Jo told me it was a sad story I didn't need to read. I told her I didn't want to read it. That's true. I do and I don't, in equal measures that cancel until the moment you decide. The podcast wants another episode in the fall. If I go back, I'll tell you what I bring with me and what shape it uses. If I don't, I'll still wake at that minute with my mouth tasting like cut stems and stone. And I'll still see my face reach for me in anything that holds light the wrong way. Right now, I keep my recorder in the drawer, and I keep my flashlight's batteries in a bag, separate, because it feels like I am giving myself time to choose when I need to see and when I don't. The rule at Bonaventure is that you stay on the path and you don't chase and you don't go past the low stones by the bluff. I followed all of that. No one tells you what to do when the thing that leads turns out to be your own reflection. and the footprints come toward you and stop exactly at the line. I can still feel the cool of the fence against the back of my leg. I can still hear the bottle breath shape of a word that might have been my name if it had finished saying itself. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I just needed to put it where I can see it so I know the story has one place to live. The rest of it, the part that keeps sliding like light on the surface of something meant to hold you, can keep whatever timing it needs. If you go after midnight and the crickets unzip and the air takes on that mouth of a bottle hush, don't bring more of yourself than you can carry back. If you find footprints, step on the path beside them. And if you look into stone and find your face, look away before you lean close enough to see whether the mouth is about to open. I don't know if it ever does. I don't want to find out on a night when the numbers stop changing. I don't usually post things like this, but I can't keep replaying it quietly anymore. Maybe if I write it out the way it really happened, it'll stop following me into new places. If you're from New Orleans, you probably know the stories better than I do. And you can say I'm just another tourist who scared himself. I used to think that about people who talked like this. I used to think hauntings were exaggerated and that superstition is just culture dressed in fog. Then I met the girl in the iron cage. That's not a title I made up. It's the only phrase that my brain will accept when I think about her. Without falling apart, I was in New Orleans for 3 days last summer to photograph street corners and write something light for a travel blog my friend Maya and I run. I'm the one who takes pictures. She's the one who writes the captions that make them feel like more than pictures. We stay in cheaper places, walk until our feet hurt, and pick one old site that gives us a way to talk about the city's past without being corny. For New Orleans, we picked St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. It's famous enough that even I'd heard of it, and we figured we'd do the responsible thing and take a licensed tour because you can't just wander in alone anymore. Vandalism, stolen trinkets, a whole history you're supposed to treat gently. The woman who answered Maya's email was named Mrs. Broussard. In messages, she sounded older and careful, like a teacher. She wrote, "We move at the pace of the dead," which made Maya smile. We met her in the humid heat just after lunch, the kind that puts a film on your forearms and makes cotton cling. The air around Basin Street vibrated with the sound of traffic and some horn player practicing a slow scale. The cemetery walls were high and sun-bitten. Locusts rattled as if someone cranked 1,000 toy engines. A group of 6 people waited by the gate with us. A quiet young couple with matching hats, a dad pushing a stroller with a baby sleeping hard, and 2 friends from Baton Rouge who told us they came every few months because they liked the hush. Maya stuck close to me with her notebook and a reusable water bottle. She kept offering to everyone else. Mrs. Broussard arrived exactly on time in a sun hat and a long linen shirt that hid her arms. She had a voice that made you lower your own without being asked. She checked off names, gave us a small talk about respect, and said the phrase about the pace of the dead again. Not as a line this time, but like a reminder to herself. The caretaker opened the gate and let us through while he scanned our group and counted. He had a ring of keys that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. When he closed the gate, it made a deep sound that my stomach remembered more than my ears, like sliding something heavy into place. Inside, the world got small. The aisles were narrow and bright as the sun bounced off white tomb walls, names carved shallow, crosses and initials and cracked shells. It smelled like warm stone and old flowers that had turned to dust but kept their shape. The baby in the stroller didn't wake, which seemed strange given how the cicadas were punching the air, but the father said the heat knocks him out. We passed a tomb with candles melted into different colors and a pack of playing cards tucked into a niche. There was a little drawing of a woman taped there, a heart drawn around her face. Everyone walked softer without being told. I'm trying to tell this plainly. Pictures lie in their own way. They flatten and pick what they want to show. I took fewer than usual that day because when I raised the camera, I kept hearing my own breath louder than the shutter. It's hard to explain that to people who look at the photos later and ask why you didn't get the angle with the shadow, why you didn't capture the precious cracked cherub whose wing had gone. The truth is my hands had a tremor I get only when I feel watched. And at first I told myself it's because cemeteries make you aware of your body, of the heavy thud in your chest and the small hairs on your arms waking. We moved in a slow loop while Mrs. Broussard pointed to names of families who built above ground because the ground refuses to hold still. Because water remembers where it wants to go. She told us about the way they stack time in there. Old burials above older ones. Bones shifted when it's time to make room. She said nothing is wasted and nothing is exactly where you think. She wasn't trying to be spooky. She said it while squinting at a brass plate as if confirming the spelling. Halfway through, while the others clustered around a famous tomb, I drifted to the end of one row because I saw iron. In a place where everything is white and chalk and sun, the iron caught my eye like a shadow with weight. The tomb wasn't ornate, not like marble crypts in postcards. It was a low vault of stone with an iron enclosure around it. Not decorative, but purposeful, almost like a cage had been fused onto a small house. The iron was black with age and rust, some parts gone orange where the humidity chewed through. It had a door with a padlock rusted into its own hole and chains looped around 3 times. The kind of overkill that makes you think whoever did it wasn't trying to keep people out so much as keep something in. The name on the plaque was so eaten by the years that I couldn't read the letters, just a suggestion of curves. I raised my camera because the light fell right across the iron bars in a way that made them glow. I tried to line it up, but the viewfinder looked muddy for a second, like a cloud had passed, except the sun was blazing and there were no clouds. Inside the enclosure was only shadow and a tightness in the air, like the time I crawled into a crawl space as a kid and realized the walls were closer than I thought. I leaned closer because there was a slit in the iron where one bar had warped, maybe from heat or a bad weld. And through that slit I saw eyes. I'm not going to dress it up. They were there in the dark at the level where you'd expect a face if someone sat inside with their back to the stone. Not glowing. Not theatrically pale. Just eyes in a human face with that wet shine our eyes have when they are trying not to blink. It was the steady way they looked that scared me more than the fact that they existed. They were listening eyes, patient and near. I stepped back so fast I hit my shoulder on the tomb wall behind me and said a word I shouldn't say in front of a sleeping baby. Maya heard because she always hears the change in my breath. She turned, saw the iron enclosure, and walked over with her pencil caught between 2 fingers. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice was light on purpose, the way she talks to dogs that might be skittish. I raised my hand and pointed through the gap. I didn't want to say the word eyes because if I said it, then it would become a thing we had both named and I would be trapped in it. She leaned toward the slit and then both of us jumped when something behind us clanged. It was only the caretaker locking another gate at the end of the row, but it sounded like it happened inside my head. When I looked back through the slit, there were no eyes. There was only the suggestion of a rounded edge and a dark interior. "I saw someone," I said too loud. The quiet couple in matching hats turned their heads. Mrs. Broussard raised one eyebrow but didn't interrupt her sentence about a famous doctor's tomb. Maya looked again, longer. "Could be someone crouching," she said, but her voice had tightened. "Hello?" she called gently. "Are you all right in there?" She's the kind who will talk gently even to a raccoon if it looks lost. We waited and heard nothing except the cicadas and the faint honk of something in the street outside the wall. I heard my own pulse thicken my ears. The caretaker noticed us and shook his head once, slow, and made a hand motion like, "Leave that alone." That got to me more than if he'd laughed. I'll own that I acted like a tourist. I took a picture anyway because sometimes the camera gets what the eye doesn't, or so we tell ourselves to feel like we can control what enters the frame. I raised the lens, zoomed through the slit, and clicked. The shutter was too loud. The sound felt rude here. I felt rude. I whispered sorry without meaning to, like a bad instinct honed in a house where my father hated even the sound of footsteps. When I rejoined the group, Maya gave me a look that was half, "You okay?" and half, "Write this down later." The Baton Rouge guys asked me if I'd seen the famous tomb of the Voodoo Queen, and I said yes even though we hadn't yet, just to keep from talking. I walked behind everyone and kept glancing back at the iron. Every time I did, I felt a little pinch in the back of my neck, like a mosquito's warning without the bite. I thought about saying something to Mrs. Broussard. I pictured the caretaker rolling his eyes at me behind my back. I said nothing. We finished the tour without drama. The baby woke and blinked like a new creature. The father nodded at the caretaker like he knew him. People tipped Mrs. Broussard and thanked her for being calm. Maya asked 2 extra questions about how the floodwaters changed things, because that's her way of squeezing real details out of trained lines. When we stepped back onto Basin Street, the air felt looser, as if our molecules were allowed to spread out again. I took a breath so deep it made me lightheaded. We planned to get beignets and then sit under a slow fan somewhere. Maya kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to bring up what I'd seen. and I kept not doing it because I didn't want to contaminate the rest of the day. The more time I gave it, the less it felt like anything solid had happened. More like a nervous misinterpretation of shadow and iron. Then my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't have saved. I answered without thinking and heard the slow, careful voice of Mrs. Broussard. "I'm sorry to bother," she said. "Did you by chance take a photograph of an iron-encased tomb toward the rear of the left row?" I said yes. She sighed into the phone, the kind of long exhale people make when a familiar worry returns. "Would you mind meeting me at the gate?" she asked. "Now, if possible." When someone who spends their days in a place like that asks you for something now, you don't argue about it. We turned around. At the gate, she stood with the caretaker and a man in a light blue dress shirt with a badge clipped to his belt. New Orleans police, 30-something. The kind of face that tries to look older for authority. He introduced himself as Officer Thibodeau. He said my name like he'd practiced it. I don't know how they knew it, though I suppose everything is connected through booking systems when you sign up for tours. He asked if we could come in a minute, and the caretaker unlocked the gate with that heavy ring of keys and that same thick sound. Maya leaned closer to me, and I felt selfishly relieved to have her elbow against mine. They didn't let other tourists in with us. The aisles felt different without the chatter of strangers. It was quieter, so quiet that even the insects sounded like they had stepped outside for a cigarette. We walked to the iron tomb. The officer pointed without touching. "Is this the one?" I said yes. He crouched and shined a small flashlight through the slit. "We got a call," he said, not looking at me. "From a visitor who thought he saw a person inside." He bounced the light slowly. "When we got here, the caller wasn't at the gate anymore. He left his name and a number that doesn't ring." He stood up and turned the light off. "It happens sometimes." He didn't sound like he believed it was just a stray call. His eyes went to the caretaker, who kept his hands in his pockets and looked anywhere but at me. "Can you show me the photo you took?" Mrs. Broussard asked. Her voice had dropped lower than before, and there was less teacher in it and more grandmother trying to keep the kids from seeing a snake. I opened the gallery and handed her my phone because I didn't want to be the one looking if something was there that wasn't a trick of shadow. She held the phone steady for a long time with her head tilted. The officer leaned in too. Maya put her hand lightly on my back like she does when I'm balancing on something. No one said anything at first, which made the pressure behind my eyes worse. Then the officer asked if he could scroll. He moved to the next shot, which was of a cracked angel. Back, which was of Maya making a face at a carved skull. He went back to the cage. He zoomed again. He held the phone closer to his face and then farther away, like an older person trying to focus. "There are eyes," he said finally, polite and quiet, like he was agreeing with a relative to keep peace. "But not enough resolution to..." He stopped. He looked at me. "You didn't take any other shots of this?" "I took one," I said. "Just that one." He nodded slowly. "Would you mind emailing it to me?" He gave me a card with his name printed neatly and an email address that ended in gov. I said I would. My mouth had gone dry. Maya asked what the caller said. The officer tapped the card against his thumb. He said someone was inside and that when he asked if they were okay, they told him the day of the week and the wrong time. He chewed his lip for a second. He said she kept saying it like she was stuck on it. He looked at the caretaker. "You said this enclosure has been sealed for how long?" The caretaker shrugged without commitment. "Long time," he said. "Before me," which didn't answer the question. He walked away a few steps to kick at a stick that didn't need kicking. I asked if they could open it. It came out of me like a reflex. If there was anyone inside, if anyone had been inside ever, you open a door. You break a lock. You don't leave it to get worse. The caretaker shook his head the same slow way as before. One side to the other like a slow clock, like no wasn't a thing you could say any faster. "You can't just open family tombs," he said. "Even if..." He trailed off. Mrs. Broussard said something soft to him that I didn't catch. The officer crouched again and looked through the slit for a long time, like he was trying to see past his own reflection. Then he stood up, brushed his knees, and said we'd better head out because another group would be arriving and we shouldn't be here when they did. He said it kindly but with a finish to it that made conversation over. He asked again for the photo. I said yes. I wanted to leave. That night, back at the Airbnb on a street where the trees made a canopy and the mosquitoes came in squads, Maya and I argued without calling it an argument. She said we should send the photo and write about it from the angle of how preservation sometimes becomes a cage. I said we should wait until we were home and not write about it at all. She looked at me like I was doing the thing where I hide behind practicalities when I'm scared, which is a fair charge. She went to brush her teeth and hum under the water, which is what she does to calm herself. I sat on the small couch and opened my email app to send Officer Thibodeau the photo, with a subject line that felt too dramatic no matter what I typed. When I attach images, I always glance at them in the thumbnail just to make sure, and when I did, the little preview of the picture didn't look like the photo I thought I'd taken. The tone was colder. The iron seemed wet. I tapped it open. The slit showed the same dark interior and unambiguously a face closer to the bars than any person could sit. The eyes were the same steady eyes I'd seen, but there was a second thing I hadn't seen through the viewfinder. Against the inside face of the iron, near the bottom where rust had eaten the paint, were scratches. Lines. At first, my brain smoothed them into noise. Then there was the shape of letters. Not clean letters you'd make with a pen, but blunt letters you'd make when your hand is making more sound than progress. It took me a minute because they weren't in a straight line. More like climbing, like someone kept losing their hold and starting again. But the name was there, scratched from the inside out. My name, first and last, spelled right, with the nick in the second letter that I always make because my second grade teacher trained me to tuck it that way. I stared until the screen dimmed to save battery. I tapped it back and handed the phone to Maya without speaking, because I had learned that if I tried to summarize it, I'd hear my own voice trying to decide whether to act impressed or scared. She took a long time like the others had. When she handed it back, she tried to be rational, because she is better at that in the moment. "Maybe someone who knows your work is messing with you," she offered. "Maybe it's a crude digital overlay, a prank." That officer could have... She stopped because even she didn't believe the sentence. "Your photos aren't public yet," she said. "Who would know your exact name and your weird letter thing?" We sat with that heavy in the room like a third person. I sent the photo to the officer. I didn't mention the letters in the body of the email because I didn't want to put them into text where they could solidify into proof. He wrote back faster than he needed to, with a simple thank you and a request to confirm the time it was taken. I told him the timestamp. He didn't respond again. Maya and I lay in the two separate beds the host had covered with quilts that smelled like another person's life. New Orleans night is loud in a friendly way, with laughter 2 blocks away and a metal gate somewhere and a car passing slow. It helped until I woke at 3:14 the way people in stories do, and I hated myself immediately for noticing the exact time. The house clock ticked and then hiccuped, then continued. Maya snored, soft and honest. In the alley, something like a chain-rubbed metal. The next morning, we went back to the cemetery because I told myself I'd feel stupid forever if I left the city without seeing it in daylight, without proving to myself that a trick happened. We didn't have a reservation. We waited at the gate like kids who forgot their permission slips. The caretaker recognized us with a look that was tired more than angry. He said they were full, but that we could go in for 5 minutes if we stayed within sight. He let us in, and I thanked him too many times. It was earlier, before tours, and the sun was off the tops of the vaults in a kinder angle. The air was still heavy, but it hadn't tightened into oven yet. We walked fast straight to the iron tomb because there is nothing graceful about this kind of compulsion. The slit was the same. Holding my phone felt like holding a secret I didn't want. I put the camera lens up to the gap and took another shot. The picture showed the iron as colder again, and it showed the scratches shinier as if wet. The letters spelled my name more clearly now because repetition deepens grooves. Under the name, lower, were 3 lines spaced like separate tries. They didn't say anything I could read yet. The face was there, but this time the eyes angled a degree away from me, as if whatever they watched had moved a little. In the strip of light that made it through the gap, I saw dust drifting not like dust falls, but as if breath keeps it in the air. "Who are you?" Maya asked through the slit. Not loud, not whispering, just a question. We waited in a silence that almost had shape. Then, like an echo, you decide to call a response. Something from inside made 2 sounds, a scrape, and then another like a dull tool dragging against a rough plate. It was low and not eager. It was patient. The caretaker called from the gate that we had 2 minutes, and even I knew we shouldn't say what we were thinking, while he could hear us. We left. We pretended to talk about coffee. We looked at each other with our eyebrows trying to do the work language was failing at. We got coffee we didn't taste. We sat on a curb because the benches were taken by people who had time for benches. A text from an unknown number vibrated my phone. The words were simple. "Did you call about the girl?" I asked who it was. The reply came from the same number. "You called yesterday." I said no. The reply. The voice said her name was Sunday, but it wasn't Sunday. I didn't show Maya right away because the message felt like a disease you could spread by speaking. When I did, she said we needed to talk to Mrs. Broussard again. We went back for the third time, which would have been funny if my bones hadn't felt like they were drinking, the heat like a warning. We waited until her group finished, and then trailed her a few steps like people do when they want to ask something they know you won't enjoy answering. She took us aside near a tomb with a broken corner that showed how the layers stack. "You should be careful how many times you come back in a single trip," she said. "There's a reason locals leave it alone for long stretches." It wasn't scolding. It was like someone telling you not to swim right after eating. Maya showed her the second photo. The woman's face did a small tightening that looked like a weather change. "That vault," she said. "We don't put it on the tour. It has no marker anyone trusts." She paused, looked at the caretaker, then back to us. "Stories collect like algae, so don't quote me. One says a family left a girl inside by accident during yellow fever, which is nonsense because you don't lock iron for fever. Another says they had a daughter who insisted she was not dead, only stuck in the Sunday she died. So they tied her into time to make it stop looping. That one is cruel and tells you more about the tellers. Another says the cage was to keep the living from using that vault for things they shouldn't." She closed her eyes for a second as if someone rubbed sand under her lids. "And then there's the small mean one that people say when they've had too much heat, that sometimes a person in there will learn the names of people who look in. I don't like that one because who taught it to us?" "Does it mean anything?" I asked. "If the scratches spell my name?" I tried to sound like I was asking about letters on a tree. She did not pretend. She reached out and touched my wrist. Her fingers were cooler than the air. "It means you should not come back," she said. "It means you should not speak about it inside that space. You shouldn't even say your name in here anymore." She glanced toward the cage, though from where we stood we couldn't see it. "Time is soft here where there is water and ritual and repetition. It listens." She lowered her voice. "If you must tell somewhere flat." We left the city that afternoon because even if Maya wanted one more night to tuck it into an essay, I needed to feel far. "Airports have a clean noise that pretends to be future. Planes have straight lines you can hold like rails." I sat with my backpack between my feet and my phone off because that made me feel safer, though I know that's superstition. On the flight back, my dreams sputtered and settled into one repeating image. The iron cage lit from the inside, not bright, just enough to make the bars glow like coals at the end of their glow. In the dream, I knew the light came from breath condensing and catching what little sun came through the slit. When we landed, Maya squeezed my fingers like a promise and said we could shelve the whole thing. I nodded and told her yes because I wanted the permission. At home, small comforts have edges you can cut yourself on. My apartment sits on the third floor and faces a parking lot with 3 lamps that always buzz. My front door sticks if it rains. The hall smells like someone else's cooking plus dust. Usually these are grounding facts. That night they sounded like a list of alibis. I took a shower as hot as I could stand because heat sometimes chases heat out. When I came out, my phone had one new email. It was from Officer Thibodeau. He wrote, "We cut the lock per protocol this afternoon." There was no hello. Just that sentence then. We found no person inside. Only iron, stone, and marks as described. He attached 2 photos. One was of the opened gate looped aside, the chain draped over the bar like a necklace. The other was a close shot of the interior surface. The scratches spelled my name again, deeper. Underneath, the 3 lines had lengthened and were beginning to form 3 capital letters in a tidy stack. The first letter of my last name repeated, then another letter I couldn't place, then the first again, as if someone was practicing. The officer wrote, "Calling number from yesterday remains unassigned. Please do not return without contacting us." He signed his name like he was writing it for himself more than me. I called Maya and read the email. She was quiet for a long beat, and I heard her pull a chair out, the scrape of wood on wood. "If there was nobody inside," she said carefully, "then the scratches are older, which is not better and not worse." I could hear the way she was trying to build a bridge over it with a sentence that could hold our weight. "I think we should let it lie," she added. "We can write about preservation without this story. We can pick a different city for the next entry. She suggested Asheville, where we can talk about trees with names. She suggested Duluth, where we can talk about cold that makes sense. She talked until my breathing matched hers. For a week, I felt okay enough to believe that everything had happened inside a pocket that closed. I went back to work. I took photos of people walking dogs and old men drinking coffee outside where pigeons scroll the sidewalk. I slept at normal hours. No sounds of chains. No waking at 3:14. I told myself I wouldn't look at the cemetery photos again, but humans are magpies for their own danger. On the 8th night, I opened the gallery to delete them all. Not to revisit, I told myself, but to remove the trigger. The first photo opened on the screen and my phone vibrated, giving me a second of dizziness no alert actually caused. The picture had changed. I know photos don't change. I know that's not how pixels work inside files that sit on a server or a chip. Yet the angle of the scratches was different. Under my name, 3 letters were clear now. Not practice strokes, S-U-N. I stared until the screen dimmed and had to tap the brightness up. The letters seemed wetter than the rest of the metal, like they had just been made. In the corner of the frame, reflected in a patch of iron polish, was the suggestion of a face that wasn't mine or Maya's. It wasn't a trick of a tourist or the officer's flashlight. It was smaller, like a girl's face pressed close in curiosity, blurry with closeness, eyes not asking for help but refusing to blink while the world changed around her. When people talk about hauntings, they like edges they can circle with chalk. I didn't get that. I got a soft thing that blended into places I thought were plain. Door hinges made polite metallic whispers when I walked past, like things that had learned my name. The radiator rattled in a rhythm that sounded like a person lightly dragging a ring across iron. Twice I woke before dawn, convinced that my room had gotten smaller by an inch on each side. Maya slept at her place and sent texts in the morning that sounded like she was trying not to mention whatever she dreamed. She wrote, "How are you?" And I said, "Good." And then I wrote, "Do you ever feel like a day repeats but the edges are shaved?" And she sent a heart, and then, "Stop." Which was fair. You have to tell your brain to stop sometimes and mean it. 2 nights ago, I got a call from a number with a New Orleans area code. It was late, and I almost let it go to voicemail, but the part of me that grew up with a father who expected to be answered picked it up anyways. I said hello and heard nothing for 2 breaths. Then a girl's voice said, "Sunday." Like a correction, like I had called her by the wrong name and she was setting it right. The line had a thin hum that wasn't quite static. I asked who she was, which in hindsight is ridiculous, but it was the first sentence my mouth found. The voice didn't answer me. It said, still patient, "Sunday, Sunday, Sunday." Not urgent, not pleading, just present. Like that was the name that fit the shape of the space around her. I hung up because a part of me thought the sound could cross my living room if I let it continue. My phone showed the call had lasted 12 seconds. When I tried to call back, a recorded voice said the number had no mailbox. The time on my screen said 3:14, which made me laugh once, a cracked laugh, because what else was there to do? I know this is the place where anyone sensible would change their number, burn their phone, move. I haven't done those things. I did something that will sound small and inadequate. I put the photo in a folder titled Other, and I put Other inside another folder titled Taxes. I told myself that folding a thing inside a boring thing removes its teeth. I turned off my phone at night and put it in another room. I started sleeping with earplugs, even though not hearing the building breathe makes me more afraid sometimes. Twice I got up and stood in the hallway at 3:14, wearing my stupid earplugs like a person in a safety video, because part of me thought the danger can't see you if you look like you're complying with some rule. It's hard to explain the logic of fear to a sane morning. It never translates well. Yesterday I printed the 2 photos because pixels felt too slippery. I thought paper would make them ordinary. The printer in the office gave me glossy rectangles with no romance. The scratches looked duller. My name looked like someone had scuffed it with a key, which is easier to file under petty. I almost felt better. Then I heard a sound behind me. Not in the office, but not in the office, a sound like a light chain sliding slow over a metal rail. I turned and the room was the same. I stood there longer than I needed to, pretending to read a recycling poster until my hand stopped shaking. A coworker asked if I was okay, and I said the weather was getting to me. which is maybe the truest thing I've said this month. I'm telling you all this now because last night I had the most normal night I've had since. I ate pasta, watched a dumb show, fell asleep before 11. No calls, no chain sounds, no dreams I can remember. I woke to rain on the parking lot, a kind rain like a broom. When I left for work, there were 3 long, dull scratches on my front door at knee height. They were spaced the way the letters had been spaced in the photo before they turned into letters. They weren't letters now. They were just lines you could explain away as someone's key or the landlord's dog or truck bed moving furniture. I took a picture, because that's what I do when I don't know what to do. My hands were steady. I went to work. I'm writing this at my desk in the hour before lunch when everyone is either on a call or pretending to be. I'm writing it in one go because I don't want to edit it and make it look like I tailored it to be scary. I know some of you will say I misread shadows, that iron plays tricks with light, that a bored caretaker told a story that grew teeth. Some of you will say there are people who live in cemeteries tucked away, and that what I saw were plain human eyes, hungry and ready with a prank to eat my name. I would like that. I would like this to be a complicated human thing with an answer you can call a locksmith for. But if you go to St. Louis No. 1 and you walk past the bright famous sites and you find the iron enclosure that looks less like a grave and more like an apology, you might feel your breath slow on purpose. You might feel watched by a presence that is not hostile and not kind. A presence that is exact the way a clock is exact. The way Sunday is exact even if you try to call it something else. And if you look through the slit, you might see only darkness. Or you might see eyes that have all the time they need. If you hear a voice and it says a day, do not say your name. That is the only advice I have the right to offer. Don't give it a hook. I haven't gone back and I won't. I haven't answered an unknown number since this morning. I wrote to Maya that I'm going to take a break from traveling and maybe do local pieces about bookstores and parks where the rules are printed on polite signs. She sent back a thumbs up, and then later, I keep dreaming of the word Sunday written on a window that fogs and clears. I didn't tell her that when I got home and wiped the condensation off my bathroom mirror after a shower. There were 3 faint lines in the fog spaced like the beginnings of letters that could be anything until you look too long. I turned the fan on. I watched the fog disappear and the lines with it. They always go. That's how this works, they go. Then you hear the soft metal sound from somewhere that isn't outside or inside, and you check the time even though you promised yourself you wouldn't, and you realize we only have names because we need something to put on the door. The rest of it belongs to whatever slips between the bars when you lean in for 1 second too long, and mistake patience for absence. There is rain against the window now, and the office lights hum. The photo sits in the folder inside the folder, and my door is just a door with marks that happen to look like 3 long mistakes at knee height. I am telling myself these sentences like prayers. Maybe that's why people stack the dead above the dead, so the weight of the names presses the past into a shape that can't get out. But cages aren't for the dead. They're for the time that pools around them. I will not look through another slit. I will not answer if the voice calls again with the wrong day. If it knocks, I'll sit still and pretend I am a chair or a wall or stone. If you're reading this because you're going to New Orleans and you like old places, go gentle. Move at the pace of the dead. If you see iron where the city is white, don't lean in. If you lean in, don't blink. And above all, don't say your name. I would like to keep mine. I keep trying to. I promise I will not answer to anything else. If you knock, I won't open. If you say Sunday, I won't reply. If you say my name, and the letters are there, scratched deep enough to catch water, then I hope you're just reading something out loud and not standing by a cage. I hope you're nowhere near a chain sliding easy through a loop at exactly the wrong time. I never write anything longer than a grocery list, but I need to get this down the way it actually happened. Without the edits I'd make telling it out loud. I know how it sounds. I know people will say I was tired or superstitious because I work around graves for a living. Believe what you want. I'm writing this because I need to see the sequence on a page, to show myself I didn't insert anything that wasn't there. My name isn't important. What matters is that for 9 years I was one of the caretakers at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. If you've never been, it's not just a cemetery. It's a garden that happens to hold the dead, with winding roads and old shade trees that throw lacework shadows over headstones. We mow and prune and sand the pathways in winter. We fix cracked stone, repaint boundary posts, and keep the little visitor center neat. It's peaceful work mostly. You learn a lot about quiet. The story starts last spring toward the end of April when the last of the snow mold had gone and the crocuses were already laughing at everyone's boots. My usual closing route is to sweep the dell path and then loop through the old section we call the ridge, where some of the oldest plots cling to a slope, like they're still trying to climb toward daylight. The green bells sit there. They're not plugged in or anything, not electric. They're iron, weathered smooth by 150 winters, each on the end of a post set near a cluster of 19th century graves. Nobody uses them now. They were part of a system some families insisted on back when premature burial was a real fear. Thin wires attached to a finger or wrist in the coffin, running up through a pipe to the bell. If the person wasn't dead and woke up, they'd tug and make a racket. If you've seen the paintings, you've probably made a joke about zombies ringing for room service. Most of the bells were removed or froze up a century ago. A few remain. They're relics we keep because they're part of the place. On that particular Tuesday, I was closing with Mara, who's been there as long as I have. She's a horticulturist with arms like saplings and the kind of humor people don't always get, until she's already walking away. We joke that she talks to the trees and I talk to the stones. We had our dinners in the maintenance shed at 5. Cold pizza for me, a Tupperware of something homemade and healthy for her. It was bright and windy, the kind of evening that makes you see your shadow as if it belongs to someone else. She reminded me to bring a spare battery for the small radio we use to call the front office if the cell signal hiccups, which it does sometimes near the tower. Then she checked the forecast on her phone and said, "They're claiming fog after 9. In April." Sure. We split our routes at the junction by the Egyptian Revival Gate. I took the ridge first, like always, because if you hit it too late, the light goes blue between the monuments and you start counting how many minutes you've got until you'd rather not be there. There were visitors still, a couple with a stroller, a young woman in a white coat reading at a bench, an older man tracing letters. The little visitor center bell chimed 6. The wind dropped. The quiet it left was so pure I could hear a robin turning leaves 20 yards away. I passed the first of the old green bells and touched it without thinking, the way you pat a dog you knew once. It was cool and solid. The wire below it, which just dangled and disappeared into an old cast iron ventilating pipe, was thick with rust. No tension. No possibility of movement. I moved on. This is the part where people usually get bored. It's a lot of sweeping. The gritty whisper of the broom. A cough in the distance. My keys clacking against the carabiner clipped to my belt. It's not spooky. The dead don't make noise as a rule. At 7:20, walking along a row of low slate stones with footstones like parentheses, I heard a bell. I stopped so fast my broom kept going and clicked down the path alone. The sound was small and plain, like someone flicked a spoon against porcelain. Not a wind chime, not a phone. It came from ahead and to the right, toward the cluster of 19th century plots where the old bell post stood. 2 notes. A pause. Another. I don't know why I started to count the gap between them, but I did. 3 seconds, then 2. The timing changed like it was finding its rhythm or losing it. I told myself it was the wind moving something just right. A seed pod. A fallen sign. Then the air stilled in that way that you can feel in your teeth. And the 4th note hung clear and lonely. And I knew there wasn't any wind at all. When you walk this place every day, your brain keeps a map you don't know you have. I felt my feet take me toward a specific bell at the end of a row that used to belong to a family named Wetherill. I know because I once weeded around those stones and the name lodged under my thumbnail for an afternoon. The bell is squat and ugly and dear to me. I stood 6 feet from it and listened. Nothing. The world had the soft, clamped feeling of the inside of a church right before a service begins. I almost apologized for intruding. "Office, this is Ridge," I said into the radio, even though it was stupid. "Do we have anyone testing the bells in section 30? Silence, then Armin's voice from the front desk. Crispy with a bag of pretzels. "Testing what bells, Ridge?" "We're fresh out of Victorians." "Never mind," I said. "Could be a loose sign. I'll take a look." Mara was the one who came up the path instead, pushing a cart with the bucket and the long-handled grabber we use for picking up trash. "I thought you were joking," she said. "I'm only here for the show." She's 38, a little younger than me, with laugh lines every plant wants to get tangled in. She cut the wheel on the cart and leaned the handle against her hip. "So, let's do spooky. Which bell?" The Wetherill bell sat sullen and green on its post. The wire that had once run down to the coffin was there in a sense that it existed, but it was snapped and frayed and lay in a lazy curve over the grass like the tail of something that had died lying down. "It was here," I said, and even as I said it, I knew the sound had been further back and higher, in the throat of the hill. Sounds move in this place in weird ways, bouncing off polished stone and hedges. We walked up the slope, not talking, the cart's small wheels crunching gravel. The evening had slid toward 8 without me noticing. A thin fog, to Mara's annoyance, had started to pool low between stones like someone had poured milk into the dips. It's odd how fast normal doubt becomes a second kind of hearing. You listen past the quiet for the memory of a sound and strain the quiet thinner. It gives. At the top of the ridge, by a marble obelisk with a crack like a healed scar, we both heard the bell again. One strike, then faint another higher or further. "I want it to be a child with a spoon hitting some tourist thing," Mara said. "I want that so much." "Could be a prank," I said automatically because it felt like grown-up words and we are both too old to scold teenagers. But there was no laughter anywhere. We found the second bell in the cluster around a family plot for the Lannons. The bell there had no wire at all. The pipe that once fed to the coffin had been capped with a little iron mushroom to keep rain out. I reached and pressed my finger to the mouth of the bell and felt nothing. I set it swinging anyway, gently. It muttered like an annoyed parrot. The sound we'd heard was smaller and precise, not this cluck. Armand called on the radio then to ask if we needed him to send anyone from security up the hill. I could picture him at his desk watching the lobby door, chewing pretzels like they owed him money. "No," I said. "We're good. Might be an animal." Once, actually, there had been a raccoon that liked to sit on the bells and scratch. I have a photo of him that makes it look like he was writing a letter to the editor. We might have chalked it up to sound echoing if the next strike hadn't paired with something else. A soft, gritty slide like something settling underground. It was nearly too quiet to register, the way your own heartbeat fades if you hold perfectly still. The fog was up to our shins now. The hairs on my arms went up. Mara put the heel of her palm in the notch of her brow the way she does when she's thinking through a plant disease. "The wires are long gone," she said quietly. "You can't ring these from below anymore. You know that?" "I know," I said. And then I made the choice that I keep turning over, because I see a dozen ways a different choice would have meant I never had to write any of this. I said we should follow the wires, even if they were broken, back toward the graves they once belonged to. It felt like a story we had both read as kids, with a simple rule and a simple end. Most of the bells are within a dozen feet of the stones they were paired to. We went bell to bell like two idiots in a scavenger hunt, tracing a rusted line an inch at a time with the toes of our boots. The fog thickened. The streetlights down by the main road came on and turned the bottom of the hill into something that looked like a stage set. A man in a gray hoodie walked through the light with a dog that didn't pull on the leash. They were the last people I saw that night who belonged to any other version of life. On the third bell, the wire remained a little longer through the grass, then vanished at the mouth of a pipe the way all of them do. The stones next to it belonged to a woman named Hester L. and her two children, who both died before 10 in the 1850s. There was a small lamb carved at one corner. I remember it because I used to wipe bird droppings off that lamb and say, "You've had enough indignity." My mouth moved to repeat it and I stopped, because I didn't want to make any sound that might be mistaken for reassurance. The bell struck again, not the one in front of us. Another out past the obelisk at the corner where the ridge path curls around a stand of tulip poplars. This time the strike wobbled and quit halfway, like a child starting to cry and thinking better of it. Then there was a gentle thump from below our feet. I have stood on frozen ground in January and felt the deep bangs of ice expanding in the soil. This wasn't that. This was closer. A rope hitting wood. That was the irrational truth my body offered uninvited. "We should get Paul," Mara said. "Paul is the head caretaker. The older kind of Boston tough who pretends he's annoyed by history even though he keeps a framed black and white picture of the 1890 grounds crew in his office." I said yes. I meant it when I said it. But neither of us moved for the cart. Maybe you've already guessed what I'll say next because it's the part people latch onto when they want to decide what we did wrong. We dug, not far, not with a backhoe. We didn't even break sod. We carried a bulb spade and a trowel because gardeners carry them the way other people carry pens. We followed the last bell to the stone that matched it, a low, rounded marker with a name we both recognized in the way you recognize song lyrics you never liked, Enoch L. Wetherill. 1827, 1854. The little italic verse beneath it was harmless and sweet. Though from our arms he's fled, he lives where angels tread. The earth around the pipe was firm, matted with old roots. We knelt. Our knees got damp. We dug a shallow collar a foot out from the pipe, the way you'd take the top off a pie. The dirt was clean and dark and smelled like mushrooms. An earthworm surfaced and changed its mind twice. The fog beaded on the back of my hand and made a lace of hair I didn't know I had. The bell did not ring while we dug. All the ordinary noises went wide and far. Maybe 10 minutes passed. Maybe less. When the spade clicked against wood, I'd like to tell you it was a shock, but of course there's wood there. We hit it at a depth that shouldn't have made sense for the lid of a coffin. Too shallow. And then remembered that the pipe we were tracing was only a guide. I guess an old thing put in by men with other tools, other maps. It could wander. I brushed aside the soil in a strip and exposed it more. It wasn't a large plank. It was a board in a rough box someone had used to line the trench for the pipe. It had the gray hum of age. It wasn't what I feared, and I almost laughed, except laughing felt like lifting a lid I didn't want to lift. We should have stopped there. We didn't. We probed further out, talking practicalities we didn't really care about. How ground settles, how roots steer around stone. My trowel slid and knocked against another board. The sound was hollow, not empty hollow. Resonant, the way a tight door sounds. That was when I noticed the hairline in the grass a little further down the slope. A subtle depression 2 feet wide, like someone had set something heavy there long ago, and everything else had grown around it. My eyes read it before my mind did, and my mouth said, "Here," too loud. We cleared that patch together. Old turf peels like a book if you know how to start the page. Under it, the soil had the flatness you only see where people intervene. Maybe you've helped plant a tree at a school and noticed the rectangle the sod makes around the hole years later. It was like that, only going the other way. The spade sides clinked stones. There was no marker here, no name. Just the neat suggestion of a forgotten thing. Armin's voice came tinny through the radio looped on my belt. "Closing in 20. Do you need a hand with the gate chains?" I flinched and hit the talk button and said much too quickly, "We're fine." Mara tilted her head. "Listen," she said. We both stopped. The fog, which had been pooling and inching like a living thing, paused with us. Somewhere up the hill, a car door shut. Farther, a siren yawned and rolled over. And below our feet, delicate as a thread drawn over smooth bone, we heard the faintest bell. One strike. Then, as if someone were gathering their breath, another. The second didn't finish. It stopped like a cough swallowed. My mouth wanted to make a joke so badly it hurt. All the jokes people make in this place about "let me out" and "wrong address" packed into a single pressure behind my teeth. I swallowed it because it would have sounded like fear with a hat on. I looked down instead. The shallow soil we'd loosened had shifted barely perceptibly toward the depression. Just a finger width, as if it were settling to a slope I hadn't seen. It would have been easy to say we'd caused it. That's the safest story. It's not the one my body believed right then. There are different kinds of knowing. The kind that makes you apply for a mortgage. The kind that makes you step off a curb without checking, because the person next to you has started to run. The latter got me. I put the trowel aside and pressed my palm to the ground the way you touch someone's shoulder before you speak. The soil was cool and still. It was also humming. That sounds dramatic. I don't mean literal sound. I mean a feeling like a cat purring 2 rooms away, sensed through your bones. I took my hand away. "Stop," Mara said, and her voice was not scared, which is how I knew she was. We stop, we fill that back. We mark it, we tell Paul, we come back in daylight. She was right. It was my shift. I was the one who normally says the cautious thing. And I would have done exactly that. Filled the little scar, patted it, made it look like we had never teased at the skin. If the ground not 2 feet from my knee hadn't cracked with a sound that was so small and so clear, it's still the first thing I hear when I wake up from the dream. It didn't boom, it ticked. Wood splitting. Under pressure. From below. I don't know if I said anything then. I know I scooped. The way you scoop when a kid trips and you put your hands out before you can think. I know the smell that came from that crack was clean and wrong. Like cedar rubbed hard. Like a drawer opened after 170 years. I know Mara said my name like a command and then like a plea. We didn't open a grave. That's the thing I need to say. We didn't dig down into any coffin. We didn't expose bones or faces, nothing like that. We worked like people who'd dropped the spade at the first inch of anything that asked to be left alone. And yet, there was wood there that had not seen the air since the morning in the 1850s when the lid was shut. There was a seam in that wood that shouldn't have existed. It ran off where our little probe ended. And if you look at the scar we left and the scar the ground gave us, they make a crooked L, like something tried to open and couldn't manage straight lines. I brushed along that seam with 2 fingers. You can hate me for that if you want. I wanted to make sure I wasn't seeing a root shadow. Underneath my hand, something shifted with the dry flecks of old fiber. The seam widened a hair. The bell, nowhere near us now because the wire was gone, rang once more all the same, crisp as if my finger had been on the clapper. We both froze in that position for a handful of heartbeats, heads bent, like people listening for a baby's breath at a door. Then we did the perversely sensible thing. We backed our mess with soil, tamped it gently with our palms, set the turf back into place like a stitch. We didn't lie to ourselves. We made it neat because we couldn't stand to leave it raw. We stood. We looked at the obelisk and at the soft churn of fog hugging the hollows. I clicked my radio and told Armin we were coming down to the gates. My voice sounded like a voice on a recording I was studying for clues. We walked quietly, pushing the little cart between us, our elbows occasionally bumping like we were old friends at a bus stop. The world had shrunk to the circle of light each lamp made over the path. Somewhere far off, a pair of teenagers laughed in a way that was more bravado than joy. We did the chains at the gate. We checked the visitor center. We wore the hollow manners you wear after a fight where nobody swung. When we got to the maintenance shed, Paul was sitting on the step with a Dunkin' cup and a look that said he'd been called by someone who shouldn't have called him. "What did you two stir up?" he said, not in a playful way. "For real," Mara said, and when she gets serious, she moves her hands less. We heard a bell on the ridge multiple times. We traced one to the Wetherill cluster. There's ground shift near an unmarked patch below Hester L's line. There's old wood too high. Something's wrong in the maps, at least. You should see it in daylight. He watched our faces for a while and then nodded once. "You don't open anything tonight," he said, to me mostly. "You go home. You come back at 6. We get the records. We go up there like professionals in gloves with a plan. We don't do the ghost tour for Armand. We said okay like we meant it. And here, in the life where stories always turn left into the sensible street, it would have ended with records and an old supervisor named Ruth from the Historical Society, and a tidy explanation about pipes and frost heave, and my overeager imagination. And I want to tell you that's what happened, because then I wouldn't have the other bits to carry. But at 5:30 the next morning I was awake already, sitting upright in bed because my phone had been ringing. Not the ringtone, the alarm chime I use for Wednesdays. Except it wasn't Wednesday. It was a weird small ring like a spoon on a glass, repeating at 3-second intervals, then 2, then stopping halfway through a note. I stared at the screen. There was no notification, no alarm. I tapped the side button. The sound kept going for 2 more strikes from somewhere inside the plastic. Then it quit, and my apartment had the oh-so-careful hush of a room with a sleeping child in the next room, even though I live alone. I won't pretend I wanted to go in early then. I wanted to throw my phone in the sink and move to the middle of the room, where the floorboards don't creak, and wait for a normal radio announcer to tell me the weather. But I have that other kind of knowing, the curb step knowing, and it walked me into jeans and into my shoes and into my little truck with the coil spring that squeaks in cold. I got to the cemetery before the gates officially opened. The big front gates were still closed, but I have keys. I parked in back of the shed, where the gravel holds a track that fits my tires perfectly every time. The air had that empty feeling clarity spring gets after rain. Birds were louder than anyone needs at that hour. There was a light on in the office. Paul's silhouette against the blinds looked like a paper cutout of a man who'd stayed too long in one place. When I stepped in, he looked up and for once didn't start with a joke. He had a folder in front of him I recognized. The old lot maps we pull out when someone wants a headstone restored or asks us where their great aunt is. Ruth from the Historical Society sat with him, her glasses halfway down her nose, a cup of black coffee trembling where it sat, because her hand was shaking a little. She's in her 70s and has a memory like a drawer of knives. "I figured the 2 of you would be early," Paul said. His voice had the weather in it, gray clearing. We looked at last year's reports. There was a line in May, hear me out, about a bell ringing in Section 30. Guy who reported it was another caretaker who only lasted a week. He said he heard the Lannon bell at closing. We checked it. We marked it as wind, and he left 2 days later. We didn't dig. He didn't look at me for that last word, which almost felt worse. Ruth tapped a page. The Wetherill plot is tidy in the records, but there's an annotation from 1880 that I never noticed. Realignment due to undermining. That could mean soil loss. It could mean they shifted ground from one part of the ridge to another. They did that sometimes to avoid roots. I don't love the word undermining here because it sounds like what it sounds like. I heard it again, I said, because saying it once out loud matters. At home, like my phone wanted to be a bell and forgot how. Nobody laughed. We went up to the ridge together with shovels we wouldn't use and a tape measure we would and gloves and polite intentions. The fog had burned off. The tulip poplars were throwing green light. The bells sat like they had always sat, pretending to be birds in a field of old flowers. We went to the unmarked depression. If I hadn't known where to look, I would have walked over it and felt nothing. Our little mended turf from last night looked like a healed scab. Paul frowned. He crouched. He touched the ground with the heel of his hand the way people test a skillet. He said a word I won't repeat because he's the one who doesn't swear at work. There, at the very edge of where the old pipe should run for the Wetherill bell, the earth had slumped in the small, exact way of a place where a long, thin thing has been drawn upward and then let go. 2 inches, maybe 3. The mark had the tidy delicacy of calligraphy. It curved. It ended under the turf we'd laid back by hand. We hadn't made it. I know because the dew patterns that morning told the truth better than any human mouth. The dew beaded differently where the ground sighed at dawn. It always does. If you do this work, you learn that language. Once you see it, you can't pretend you don't. Ruth made a sound I'd never heard from her before, a sort of small, unhappy, oh. She held up a page. The safety coffin thing, she said. And she's usually allergic to drama. It wasn't just a bell. Some had a spring-loaded lid brace. Not many, but a few. It would keep the lid from closing all the way back down if someone inside pushed. I don't want to... She stopped. She looked at the breath-white grass and then up at us again. If the coffin failed, if the box cracked, a brace might kick outward. It could make a split. She swallowed like a person who has said bedtime prayers out of habit and suddenly chooses each word. You describe a split. I'm not opening anything, Paul said sharply to the air and to us and to the rules that live in his spine. We mark this. We call the state. We get a permit if there's any question. We bring a team if a team is needed. We do not make criminal a bad story. He set flags around the spot like someone claiming a campsite. We backed away together, the way people back away from an animal they want not to spook. When we were almost to the path, the Lannon bell, 50 feet behind us, spoke once in a note so clean and perfectly shaped it felt like a drop of cold on the back of the neck. We didn't turn. We didn't have to. All 3 of us looked at the ground in front of our shoes like that was the point of the conversation. The bell did not speak again. I wish I could say there was a follow-through where we did all the proper things and the proper things fixed the part of my head that walks differently now. We did some of them. We filed reports. The Historical Society came up with their delicate tools and their careful excitement, and took measurements and photographs. There were polite meetings with polite people who, to their credit, didn't make us feel foolish. They found explanations for some of it that soothed other people, and I can write them down because they are not lies. Old wire may run further than anyone thought and snag on roots or boards and carry vibration. Wooden boxes under soil settle strangely and can produce small, sharp shifts. Frost can open and close seams. Sounds move weirdly here. If you are tired enough, your phone will double its alerts. People who work in quiet places learn to hear things nobody else does. All true. None of it closes the seam that opened in my life. A week after that morning, the state sent someone who shrugged professionally and left us a list of next steps that nobody had the money for right now. We resodded the spot properly, rolled it until the seam where we had cut in the dark disappeared to the eye. When I walk by now, visitors step over it without registering anything. Their eyes on their dogs or on the etched letters of their dead. A month later, a family came to put peonies on Hester L's stone and took a photo there because the light was soft. I know because the grandmother asked me to take it so she could be in the picture, and I said yes and held her phone with both hands like a sacrament. When I handed it back, the woman smiled and said, "You must hear the bells sometimes up here." I swear I heard one when I was a girl. I hear a lot of things, I said, which is the truth I can say out loud. I lasted until October before I quit and took a job fixing fences up near Waltham. I told Paul I wanted more sun and fewer keys. He nodded and passed me an envelope with a handwritten note that I haven't been able to read yet. Mara hugged me in the shed and told me I'd be back in a season when the tulips came up wrong and needed someone to tell them why. I told her to text me if anything rang, and then we both said, "Don't," at the same time and laughed because it was that, or we cry. There's one more part that I haven't told anybody because it sounds like embroidery, even when I say it flat. It's small. I know how small it is. It changes everything anyway. 2 nights after I turned in my keys, I woke at 12:01 a.m. exactly. My room was black, the kind of city black with soft edges and silent in a way that made me think of snow, even though it hadn't snowed yet. I didn't know why I was awake until my phone, face down on the dresser, gave me a single bright, perfect chime. Not my alarm, not a message. The sound was too round, too uncomplicated. I picked it up and the lock screen said 12:01. And the minute I tilted the phone to see better, the screen went briefly gray the way the old ones used to when you pressed their corners. For half a second, long enough for my brain to print the image and file it, the light inside the glass wasn't the light of a screen at all. It looked like sunlight through water hitting something green and round and metal that had swung 1,000 times and was steady now. Then the screen was just a screen. My kitchen hummed the small, honest hum of the refrigerator that knows its purpose. No more sound came from the phone. I set it down. I lay back. I tried not to put my palm against the mattress the way I had pressed it to the ground. I waited for nothing. Nothing is exactly what arrived. But when I finally slept, I dreamed I was walking up the ridge path with a crowd of people whose faces I couldn't bring up. All of us with our elbows bumping gently, like old friends in a doorway. And from somewhere under the path we walked, patient as a metronome, something tapped wood to wood as if to say, "I am here, I am here, I am here," and then, right when every voice in the world would turn to it, the sound stopped a half note shy of itself and the quiet took it in like breath. I know what the thing to say is, the brave thing, that I'll go back when the lilacs bloom and stand where the seam was and listen with my hands open. Maybe I will. Maybe what I'll do is keep fixing fences, keep sleeping at the edges of the bed, keep my phone face down, and show up at Mount Auburn like any other visitor at polite hours, walking the ridge with my voice zipped up tight inside me, nodding at the bells like they're birds that have forgotten how to fly and are happier for it. You can tell me about frost and roots and I'll nod because I know those things too. But when I change rooms now, I count in 3s without meaning to. And I have stopped wearing the watch my father gave me because I don't like how the second hand stutters sometimes at the 12 before moving on. If you go and you walk the old section slowly and you hear something small and plain test the air, do me a favor. Don't say my name where other people can hear you. Don't call Armand on the radio and make it a joke he has to help along. Just count between the notes. If the second stops halfway, if you can feel the quiet leaning close, step off the grass and onto the path, and walk back down toward the gate with your elbows hanging loose. If anyone asks you why you're leaving early, tell them you got what you came for. And if your phone wakes you at 12:01 with the same single perfect chime, don't follow it outside. Let it ring once more in your pocket. Let the last half note go unplayed. There's a kind of courtesy in that. There's a kind of mercy in not insisting on the ending you think you deserve. I've never posted anything like this before, and I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need this out of my head so I can maybe get some sleep without checking my passenger window every time a streetlight flashes by. If you know the stretch of Archer Avenue that runs past Resurrection Cemetery and toward the Des Plaines River, you already know the look of the place after midnight. The kind of quiet that isn't really quiet. Just layered sounds, diesel engines humming in the distance, wind worrying the chain-link fence along the cemetery, the river slapping slow against the banks like a breathing thing. That's my route. I work nights for a towing outfit based in Bridgeview. We pull stalled semis off the shoulder, jump batteries, drag the odd fender bender to a body shop that's never truly closed. It's routine, lonely work, and I've always liked that. You see your share of wrecks, you get good at telling the living from the dead by the way people look at their own hands afterward. For years I didn't think anything could surprise me out there. Then a few months ago I picked up a girl by the fence. I'll give you the cast so you don't imagine I'm doing this alone. There's me. There's Luis, who runs nights with me, but usually takes the western calls toward Lamont. He's got a laugh that rattles the steering column over the CB. There's Ava, our dispatcher, who drinks black coffee at 2 a.m. like it's a dare, and keeps her voice so calm you don't realize she's rerouted 3 of us mid-sentence. There's Hank, real name Robert, but nobody calls him that. An independent trucker who brings a reefer down from Wisconsin every Thursday and always breaks for pie at the diner by the river. And there's Officer Nolan from the Sheriff's Department, who never writes us up for stopping in weird places, and once stood with me in the sleet for an hour just to keep an old guy talking until his son showed up. People on the road start to feel like a family you didn't pick, but somehow ended up with. The first time I heard about the girl was from Hank. He's got that big-chested confidence of somebody who's hauled things bigger than himself for a living, somebody who knows what his brakes will do before he touches them. He came into the diner on a Tuesday night looking like he hadn't slept, which was strange because his truck was parked straight in the lot and he's fussy about that. He slid into the booth across from me, still in his flannel, and said, "You know that fence by the cemetery? I saw a kid there, man. White dress. Walking along the posts like she was counting them." "People walk there," I said. "There's sidewalks." "Not at 2, he said. She looked right at me. I slowed and she raised her hand. I pulled over and asked if she was okay. She said, "I need a ride home," and she told me an address. Honest to God, she sounded like my niece on the phone. "What address?" "An old one," he said, and he wrote it down on a napkin. It was a river road number that didn't sit right in my head because it just kind of didn't exist in the way he said it. Wrong block. Wrong century. He said he'd driven there anyway and found nothing but a fenced lot with white gravel like broken shells. I circled twice. I got out, looked around. Nothing. Came back to the cab and the passenger floor mat was wet like somebody had stood there with river mud on their shoes. I keep my truck cleaner than my apartment. It wasn't there when I left the diner. I made a joke about the pie being extra juicy to make him smile and we left it alone. People see things. Sometimes it's the hour. Sometimes it's fatigue that braids the dark into shapes with your headlights. But 2 weeks later, a guy from a roofing crew flagged me near the same stretch because his work van had stalled, and he didn't want to leave it blocking half the lane. I got the chains under it and had just cranked the winch when he said, "Hey, you see her?" He was pointing with his chin, both hands in his hoodie pocket like he was refusing to point with his fingers at the thing he didn't want to be real. A small figure moved along the cemetery fence. Thin, white dress catching the sodium orange of the streetlight. The wind was pushing the hem around her shins like the dress wasn't heavy enough to belong to this weather. I set the brake, stepped off the flatbed, and called out, "Hey, you okay?" My voice came back hollow, shaping itself to the fence and the trees. The girl stopped and turned. I swear I felt the night tighten, like the air had remembered something. She was maybe 8 or 9. Dark hair, cut blunt, not styled. Bare legs, bare feet. The pavement should have been cold enough to sting. She lifted her hand with that tiny, hesitant wave kids use when they're embarrassed to ask for help. "I need to go home," she said. I was close enough to hear it clearly over the wind. Her voice didn't have an accent, but there was something careful in it, like she was repeating a sentence she'd practiced. "What's your name?" I made my voice soft. When weird things show up on the road, gentle helps even if it's just a dog. "Ellie," she said after a second, as if she'd reached for it somewhere very far away. "Can you take me home? Where do you live?" She gave me the same River Road address Hank had shown me on the napkin. I didn't realize it was the same until later. At that moment, I only felt a small line of cold run from my wrist to my elbow, and the instinct to get her out of the wind. "Let me call an officer to help us out," I said. "They can take you." "No," she said, hard enough that it cut over the traffic. "You can take me." She hugged herself like she was remembering to mimic being cold. "I got a job to finish," I said, lifting my chin toward the van. "You can wait in my truck where it's warm. Then I'll drive you." "Okay." She didn't nod. She just sort of accepted it like we'd agreed last week. I walked ahead of her to the passenger side of the tow truck, opened the door, and helped her up by offering an elbow she didn't take. The smell hit me then, river water with that faint green edge of algae and something like unwashed wool. When she settled onto the seat, there was a sound like fabric ringing out. I closed the door. Some part of me kept trying to lay all this out on a table. Kid out too late, some custody issue, maybe a runaway who didn't understand the trouble she was in. Couldn't get a good grip on any of those explanations. I finished hooking the van and told the roofing guy I'd be back with his receipt. He looked past me at the truck and said very quietly, "She get in there?" I nodded. He rubbed the cross under his shirt with his thumb like it itched. "Don't make her mad," he said. And I almost laughed at how ridiculous that sounded coming from a grown man in a Carhartt jacket, with forearms like he lifted lumber for fun. When I got in on the driver's side, the cab smelled colder. Not a temperature change exactly, but the memory of one. It made the back of my neck prickle. She was sitting very straight, hands in her lap, head up. Even kids who try to be polite sink into the seat, stare out the window, ask about the radio. She was quiet. When I started the engine and the heater fan came up, her hair didn't move at all. "You said River Road?" I asked, already knowing. She told me again. "All right," I said. "We'll drop this van at the lot a mile up and then head there." "Thank you," she said. It felt like gratitude, you might say, in church, precise and shy, not like a kid. I pulled on to Archer. The cemetery wall sloped by, black iron and white stone. People put little lights along their relatives' graves there sometimes, so you get these floating pinpricks beyond the fence that look like fireflies frozen on their last step. At the lot, I buzzed the gate with the remote and eased the roofing van into a slot. I kept glancing at her to make sure she was still there, and every time I looked, her face was turned toward the windshield, not like she was watching the road, but like she was waiting for the glass to tell her something. When I hopped out to talk to the night clerk and sign the receipt, she didn't shift. The mat on the passenger side had a dark patch that looked like a footprint pressed sideways, heel smudged, toes indistinct, like whoever had stood there had been too tired to put all their weight down. Back in the cab, I clicked the GPS in, even though I could drive the River Road blind. Old habit. The unit took the address without complaining, which bothered me less than it should have. I've typed in bogus addresses before and gotten the little red banner that says "No match found." This time it chirped and drew a straight white line to a piece of road that, as far as I knew, had been a lot with a chain across it since before my parents learned to drive. "Okay," I said, mostly to myself. "Let's go home." The way she smiled made me stare too long. Just a brief, careful show of teeth like she'd been taught to do it. You know how Riverside Drive curves, how the river moves in and out of view and the lights texture the water like scales? We drove past a bar that was shuttered, the neon sign dead, and past the little pump house with its windows empty and tidy, like eyes sewn shut. The GPS counted down calmly, and I had that fast, light feeling in my stomach I sometimes get when I'm pulling a really heavy vehicle off a shoulder with oncoming traffic barreling by. A thought flickered at the edge of my mind, and I kept trying to catch it. It was something about the rails by the bridge, or maybe about the way the road dips and lifts as if the land is breathing. When we got to where the GPS told us to turn, there was no driveway. There was, exactly as Hank had said, a chain-link fence with a locked gate and behind it a white gravel lot. Beyond that, scrubby sumac and a flat space with long grass. The river was close enough to create its own breeze, cold for August, smelling of muddy roots. I let the truck idle. The passenger window fogged a little on the inside like someone was breathing on it too close. She put her palm on the glass. It left no print. "This is where you live?" I tried to make the joke gentle. "Nice place. Very minimalist." "It was there," she said. "Before." She said it like kids say before dinner or before school, like it had always had a place in the day. "When?" "The year that was broken," she said. "When the water was high." She looked at me. You know how sometimes you look at someone and you get an echo? Like you've seen their face in a different room, a different century, and you remember them without knowing why? It landed on me hard enough to make me grip the steering wheel. I looked away and watched the fence. I could almost see a house there if I let my eyes go out of focus. Green shingles, a narrow porch sagging, a metal lawn chair tipped sideways. But it might have been my brain snapping pieces into place to keep from standing in front of nothing. The truck's radio crackled even though I hadn't keyed it. Static built like it does before lightning. I checked the sky. Clear. Luis's voice came through the CB, faint and doubled like a tape playing under itself. "You still on the river, man? You still, hello?" I thumbed the mic and said, "Copy, I'm on river. Got a kid who needs a ride." "Officer on Archer says to stay put," Ava said through the dispatch channel, voice steady as ever. "There's been calls about a juvenile walking." "He's on his way." The girl tipped her head like she'd heard that too and said, No police. I promised a ride, I said. I didn't promise to be stupid. I smiled to make it less harsh. She didn't smile back. For a second, her age shifted in my head. Kids have spare faces, wide open, recyclable expressions. This one had weight behind it, like the features had settled into place and wouldn't move again. The truck's dash clock blinked once. It went from 2:17 to 12:01. My heart jerked little rabbit fast. The first time anything messes with your sense of time, your brain responds like you missed a step on concrete stairs. I tapped the clock. It flipped back to 2:17 like it was proud of itself. When I looked at the girl, she was watching me the way you watch someone pick at a bandage. I told myself my eyes were dry, and that's why the minute looked like it had flickered. Ava kept talking in my ear. Officer Nolan was 2 minutes out. "You all right?" she asked. "You sound thin." "Fine," I said. "Just cold." The heater fan was pushing hard now, and I realized the windshield had scaled over inside with a fine film of moisture. The girl's hair had beads of water clinging to it like dew on fishing line. The air in the cab felt crowded with old breath. I cracked my window and immediately smelled the river again. Stronger now, with that sweet, deep rot smell that only shows up after a flood. Right then, the passenger door lock clicked. I didn't touch it. I have child locks on my doors because I've transported too many drunk college kids, and once, memorably, a golden retriever that kept trying to climb into my lap. The lock sat there, popped up like a tooth. I reached across and pressed it down. It clicked back up. The girl didn't move. She didn't laugh either. And kids laugh when they figure out they can make a thing do a thing. She just watched the door like we were both waiting for it to decide. Headlights swung into the notch of the road and I exhaled. Officer Nolan pulled in behind me, his light bar off, just the low beams washing the fence. He walked up my side, hand lifted in a hello, breath puffing like smoke. I rolled my window down and he leaned in. "We got 3 calls," he said before I could even start. "People thought they saw..." He stopped. He looked past me into the cab and blinked like a camera had flashed in his face. "Who you got there?" "A kid," I said. "Says her name's Ellie. Wants to go to River Road number that doesn't exist." He shifted his weight and peered. I recognized the move. It's what you do when you look for a kid who might bolt. It's also what you do when you look for a kid who might not be there. "Miss," he said to the passenger seat. "You okay?" The girl tilted her head, not toward him, but toward the windshield again. "I want to go home," she said softly. "Please." The please bruised something in me. There's not much I wouldn't do for a please that small and serious. Nolan heard it too. His expression changed, softened, then pinched. He rubbed at his sleeve like there was static in the fabric. He looked at his car, then up at the fence, at the gravel beyond, at the river's dark slickness. He stood there like a man trying to remember the instructions for a machine someone had taken away. "We'll call child services," he said, voice gentle. "We'll get you somewhere warm tonight and we'll figure out home in the morning." "No," she said again, and the lock clicked a 3rd time. "Kid," I said, "please work with us." She turned to me then and smiled again. It was worse now that I knew it was coming. The moment stretched like gum between teeth. In the corner of my eye, through the fog on the glass, I saw a woman in a long skirt step up to a front porch and call a name that the wind twisted into 3 syllables I couldn't hold on to. I blinked it away. There was no woman. There was no porch. The river made a sound like someone skimming fingernails along a drumhead. And then the passenger window fog drew a shape by itself. A small curve like a fish's belly, a hooked line like a J, and a straight line that could have been the side of a letterbox. I watched, barely breathing, as it wrote a number, the first number of the address she had given me. The curve slipped and smeared like a finger had fumbled through it. I reached out without thinking and traced the rest of the address through the damp. My finger came away wet and clean. The radio crackled so loudly that I flinched. "Do not open the door," Ava said, and her voice was not calm now. "Stay in the vehicle. That's the thing. The door wasn't the problem. The problem is that doors imply something will come through them. This thing didn't need doors. Or maybe it did and just didn't think of them the way we do." A sound came from the passenger side, 3 light taps. Fingertips maybe, or knuckles of something very small. Then another, closer, like it had come from inside the door panel. The heater stopped. Not the fan, the feeling of heat. The air went flat, old, as if it had been stored in a jar. The hairs on my arms lifted. Out on the fence, a plastic grocery bag had caught on a twisted wire and was flapping and snapping with the wind. It went silent too, the material hanging limp like a wet flag. "I'll take you," I heard myself say, and I didn't know who I was promising anymore. Her, Nolan, the river. "I'll take you around the block. We'll look together, okay?" The door lock went down and stayed there. I pulled onto the road slow enough that the gravel sounded loud under the tires. Nolan fell in behind me. The GPS line on the screen shifted like it was being tugged, correcting me toward a turn that didn't exist, then giving up, then creating a fresh line, all with the same quiet certainty it uses when you take a wrong ramp and it builds you a new world to drive through. The girl sat as still as a photograph. When we came level with the bridge, she leaned forward the smallest amount and breathed on the glass. I waited for words to appear in the fog, some final instruction, some date, some name. Nothing came. The river moved beneath us like a slow thought. We crossed and circled. I drove the same quarter-mile 3 times, and on the second pass, the cab filled with a smell that was almost sweet, like damp paper, like a book that had been closed for too long. On the third pass, Nolan's light bar flicked once and stayed off like he'd reached for it and changed his mind. We pulled into the gravel cut again, and I put the truck in park. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it in more directions than I could count. "I can't find it." "I know," she said very softly. "It's not there." She turned her head slowly and looked at me as if something important had finally clicked into place. "You can still take me home, though." I didn't want to look at her eyes. I did anyway. They didn't glow. They weren't black. They were just a child's eyes, dark and level and bottomless, because all children's eyes are bottomless if you think about it too long. I nodded because the other option was to get out and run onto the road and keep running until something stopped me, and I didn't want to make a choice like that. I took my phone, opened maps, and typed in the address again. This time it didn't accept it. Red banner, no match found. I typed the street name only. The map zoomed smoothly to a different point. Along a dogleg of river I pass a dozen times a week without seeing. A board and batten cottage sat there in the satellite view, warm from above, alive. When I tapped the image, the date stamp popped up. 1948. The feature was some historical view the app had stored and spit up by accident. My finger hovered over the Get Directions button. I didn't press it. The girl in the seat watched me without blinking. Nolan came to my window again and knocked once. I jumped, then rolled it down. He leaned in, eyes trained on my face this time, and said quietly, "Tell me she's still in there." I worked my jaw like it had rusted. "Yeah," I said. He nodded just once. "All right. I'm going to follow you to the station. If she's a runaway, we'll sort it. If not..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The sentence went out to the river and sank. I turned the truck around. The girl didn't protest. We drove 10 minutes toward the sheriff's office, past warehouses that only look populated at night, the kind where one lit window with a shadow moving behind it is worse than 100 lit windows with men working. At a red light, she said, "Does your father still listen to the radio by himself?" She said it like she was asking about the weather, like she had read a sentence in a book and wanted to see if it fit my life too. "My father's not around," I said. "The truth is he is around, very much so, but only physically, and sometimes I think if someone asked me what station he listens to, I wouldn't know." She nodded like I'd said the right answer anyway. The light turned green. We crossed a set of tracks that thumped the undercarriage in a familiar tune. I glanced over. The seat was empty. I braked without meaning to. The truck behind me, Nolan, stopped clean. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my throat. I looked down. The passenger mat was soaked, as if someone had stepped out of a lake and stood there long enough to drip into the grooves. The air for 1 second was so cold my teeth ached, and then it was simply night again. The heater working, the cab smelling like my old coffee and grease and vinyl. I didn't say anything into the radio. Nolan didn't either. We drove the rest of the way without talking. At the station, a young officer met us at the door with a clipboard and the gentle smile you put on so people know you'll believe almost anything they say if it helps. We told him she had disappeared. He glanced at my empty truck, at my face, at the way my hands wouldn't stop rubbing my jeans like I was trying to dry them. He said, "It happens sometimes. If someone reports a missing kid, we'll call you." It was not the first time he'd had a conversation like that. It wasn't the first time I'd left a building feeling like I'd come in with more than I carried out. I didn't sleep the next day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the white gravel lot. Not even the girl. Just the place that had been there and then not. Like gum lifted off the underside of a table. leaving a clean circle that made the wood's age look worse. I went back to the diner that evening before my shift, hoping for the clatter of plates and Hank's easy voice. The waitress, Dee, sat down my coffee and asked if I'd heard about the harassment calls they'd been getting, people asking for directions, to an address on River Road that her grandmother swore had burned down before the year the water came up. She said it like that, the year the water came up. And then we both laughed too hard because the phrase felt like something we'd both been trying to remember. She said her grandmother kept a shoebox of old photos, and if I wanted to drop by after midnight, she'd show me a picture of a house that looked like it had a song stuck in its teeth. I told her I might. I didn't. Over the next month, it didn't stop, it spread. Luis radioed to say he'd spotted a girl by the fence and kept driving even though his hands had wanted hard to stop. A Lyft driver told me on a cigarette break that she'd been hailed there by a child and had nearly called it in but decided to reassign the ride like it had been a glitch. 2 guys from a tree service said they'd watched a little hand drag along their truck's bed rail, leaving a clean line in the pollen that was gone the second they looked a third time. Officer Nolan said nothing official, just that some nights when he patrolled by the river, his dash cam recorded 3 minutes of nothing but static, with a shape moving under it like a fish beneath ice. I tried not to stop anymore. I tried to become the person who looks straight ahead and doesn't see peripheral motion. That worked until it didn't. The night before last, rain came in sheets that made the cemetery lights into smeared halos. I was coming back from a call near the quarry with an empty bed, humming to keep myself company because the radio had developed a warble that made human voices sound off. By the fence, the wind had jammed damp leaves into the links so thick they looked like scales. She stood there, not in the middle of the sidewalk this time, but just inside the fence where the ground dips and the grass grows taller. I knew better than to see her inside the fence. That was the cemetery's business, not the road's. But she was there, half hidden, her dress soaked and clinging, her bare feet sunk into the mud that should have been nothing but winter-hard ground. She lifted her hand, small, rehearsed. I pulled over anyway because for all the caution I had taught myself, for all the stories I'd heard, she was still a child in the rain. When she climbed up, I didn't feel the cold as sharply. Maybe you can get used to anything. She sat and watched the glass. I didn't ask where she lived. I didn't type anything into the GPS. I drove toward the river because I knew that's what she wanted, and it felt wrong and right in equal measure. At the bridge, the wind shoved the truck. I corrected and kept it straight, and it was only later I wondered if I had felt the wind at all. She breathed on the window. Nothing drew itself this time. We didn't circle. When I turned into the gravel cut, there was no fence. There was the fence, of course. There is always the fence, but for one heartbeat, there was also a dark, low house with yellow light in one window, and a woman on the porch calling softly. The sort of calling that doesn't need to be loud because the person you're calling already knows the sound of you. The woman raised her hand the way the child does. The same small, careful wave. The truck's engine sound thinned, then fattened like it was climbing a hill that wasn't physically there. The girl leaned forward, both hands against the glass. The window didn't fog where her palms touched it. She whispered something. I don't know what. It might not have been in words meant for me at all. I said, "It's okay." And then the radio broke into a music I haven't heard since my father used to sit in the kitchen after we went to bed, tuning the dial in small increments so the song would come in steady enough to keep him from thinking. The song didn't have a singer. It had somebody's breath woven through it like thread through a seam. Headlights hit us and the house was gone and the fence was there and the gravel lot and the river nudging the banks like a shoulder. I tapped the lock. It stayed. She didn't turn to me this time. She watched the fence a long moment, then straightened. When she finally looked at me, she was not smiling and she was not sad. She was just done with something. She said, "Thank you," and the door lock clicked up. It shouldn't have. The child lock was still engaged. I didn't put my hand out to stop anything. I didn't move at all. The passenger door didn't open. The space on the seat wavered as if air had become water there, and then my eyes said the thing in front of me was simply empty vinyl. The mat was wet. The heater fan sighed like a tired person getting off a couch. The radio went back to static and then to nothing. I sat there breathing like someone had punched me in the chest. Nolan passed by slowly. His face turned toward the road, not at me, like we'd already decided what we would and wouldn't admit to. I drove home off shift and slept heavy and stupid for 2 hours, and when I woke up I had the taste of river in my mouth and the sound of my father's radio in my ears. I went to see him that afternoon. He looked old in the way that makes your heart go sideways. He had the radio on, some tinny station playing a baseball game that wasn't in season. He asked what I'd been hauling lately and told me again, the way he always does, how the streets near the river used to flood when he was a kid, and how one year the water moved fast enough to carry away a porch swing with a dog sleeping on it, and the dog floated like he'd been waiting all his life to be carried. There was a house, he said suddenly, eyes not on me anymore, where the girl used to wave at cars because her dad worked nights and she liked to see the headlights on the wall. Then one year the river came up and took the wall. He blinked, refocused on my face. "You eating?" "You look thin." I told him I was fine. I drove aimlessly after that. The kind of driving where you go places because your body remembers where your hands go when the car turns itself. I ended up parked by the lot. You can guess that part. The fence rattled like the wind had fingers. The gravel lay quiet, a white bed for something small. I walked to the gate and leaned my forehead against the cool metal. I didn't pray. I just let the cold settle into the skin there until my thinking slowed down. When someone behind me cleared his throat, I flinched and turned. It was the old caretaker from the pump station. He's got that rueful face people who spend their lives near water often have. Like they've shared a joke with it that no one else heard. "You looking for directions?" he asked, half kind. "Sort of," I said. He squinted at me and then out at the lot. "There used to be a place right there," he said. "Porch with a chair that squealed like a mouse when you sat. Girl who always wore white because her mother did the wash early and it dried fast in the wind." He made a gesture with his hand like he was hanging a sheet on an invisible line. "Lot of addresses around here don't exist anymore if you want to be picky about it. But they existed once. The river keeps its own records." We stood there a while and then he wandered off like he'd remembered a gate somewhere dangling open. I stayed until the sky went the shade of blue that means night is already decided, and then I went to work. On the way to my first call, I felt it again, the tap on the passenger window. 3 light knocks. I didn't look. I didn't need to. The taps came again, softer, like a reminder. I kept my eyes on the road. I said out loud because nobody else was there to hear me, "I'm still driving." The taps stopped. The radio came alive with Ava's voice asking me where I was headed. I told her. She said, "Copy," sounding like herself again. "So that's it. That's what I have." I don't know what you'd call what I picked up that night, and I don't think names help. I do know that when I pass the fence now, I sometimes see a small figure walking along the posts, fingers trailing as if she's counting, patient as a metronome. Sometimes I keep going. Sometimes I slow down without meaning to until all my mirrors are full of orange light and metal and that long ribbon of chain. Often there's nothing there when I look straight at it. But sometimes when the rain has just stopped and the river is loud enough to sound like far-off applause, the passenger window fogs in the shape of a curve and a hook and the beginning of a box, like someone is practicing how to write home. And sometimes the dash clock blinks 12:01 for just a second before it corrects itself. And my GPS chirps a direction to a place that isn't there anymore. And the cab smells of wet wool, and the heater keeps doing nothing while doing everything. If that happens, I keep both hands tight on the wheel and drive as smoothly as I can, like I'm trying not to wake a sleeping child. Last night, just before 3, I passed the fence again. I had told myself I would not look. I had told myself I had no more rides to give. The passenger window tapped once. A small sound, polite. I didn't turn my head. The GPS chimed as if it had discovered a new road, and the screen wrote a route I'd never seen, not on any map. A thin white thread that traced along the river and then out into the dark like a line drawn by a hand that remembered how a neighborhood used to be. The voice said in that calm, nothing tone, "You have arrived," and I drove on. And the tapping followed me for 3 intersections and stopped. I don't know if that means I left her behind or if arrived is not what I think it is. I do know that when I parked for coffee, I found a single muddy footprint on the passenger mat, too small for any adult, too wide for a child who'd never walked in riverbeds, and the wet mark climbed the door panel a good 8 inches higher than I think it should have. I wiped it away with the diner's napkin and put the napkin in my pocket and forgot and carried it home. It's dry now. It smells like paper. It's on my kitchen counter while I sit here trying to decide if I should throw it away. If you drive that route and you see a white dress along the fence and your hands start to turn the wheel on their own, you'll do what you do. I won't tell you what's right. I can only say that some addresses live longer than the houses that wore them, and some rides don't end when you think they do. Please don't tell me I'm imagining this. I don't care if I am. Some nights you take a stranger home because that's the only way to get yourself there. And some nights you arrive and the place you meant to go has been gone for 70 years, and you put your hand on the glass and wait for the fog to write you an answer. Tonight, when I head out again, I'll pass the fence at about the same hour, and my dash clock might run a trick and rest on 12:01 before it remembers itself. If it does, I'll keep going. If it doesn't, I'll keep going. Either way, I'll keep a space on the seat, and if I hear the tapping, I'll try not to look and I'll fail, and something small and careful will lift its hand, and I'll know exactly where she wants me to turn. I don't care if anyone believes me, I just need to put this out there because my sleep has stopped being sleep, and I can't keep having the same conversation with myself at 3 in the morning. I'm a second-year film student in Los Angeles, and this started as a class project. It was supposed to be a short observational documentary about how people care for public memory, specifically the volunteers and staff who maintain Hollywood Forever Cemetery. My professor said our job wasn't to tell a spooky story, but to record real, ordinary work that people do to keep our city's history intact. I took that to heart. I went in with my Zoom H5 and a Rode mic, a simple rig, Sony mirrorless with a 35mm prime, an ancient tripod I borrowed from the school cage, and a notebook where I scribbled shot lists in pencil because pens felt disrespectful around stone. I had a partner from class named Jonah who's good at sound, and my friend Maya who's not in our program but knows how to keep me honest. She came because she said cemeteries feel less weird when 3 people are there, and you can hear 2 of them breathing. We started filming in late February. Los Angeles was doing that thing where the air shifts after a light rain, where the ground smells like damp dust and eucalyptus and you can almost pretend the city is new. The cemetery office was polite. They gave us a weekday permit and then, after Jonah asked nicely, allowed us 2 evenings to catch dusk light. We talked to a groundskeeper named Mrs. Ruiz, a woman with forearms strong enough to lift a world. She laughed when I asked if movie people ever do anything strange and said the strangest people were always regular people. She didn't say it to be clever. Her son was her assistant that day, lugging bags of mulch. There was a security guard too, older guy named Victor, who liked to walk with his hand on his belt like there used to be something there and he missed the weight. He told us where not to step and how to spot sunken ground by the way the grass lays. Jonah tested levels. Maya brought a thermos of chamomile, and I did the thing where you get so focused on exposure and framing that you forget to be a person with a body. The first strange thing came on our second night. I had transcribed a lot of the names we filmed, not because I needed to, but because I liked the rhythm of them. People who never met each other now reading like a poem in my notebook. Maya said it was my version of counting sheep. I had this one row of small flat markers near a ficus where the mower tracks made perfect parallel lines. The center stone, a simple bronze plate on granite, read, Helena Jared on our first night. The date of death was 1964. On our second night, when I moved to shoot a repeat angle to capture how the light hits different, the same plate said Eleanor Jared. I thought I'd misremembered. I wrote it down twice. I had a photo from the first night because I'd been testing white balance. It clearly said Helena. The second night, it clearly said Eleanor. I showed it to Jonah, and he did the thing where he raises one eyebrow like the movie version of skepticism. Plates get replaced, he said. Families update spelling. Maybe we just didn't notice. Maybe someone had cleaned off grime that hid the letters. Maybe we were telling ourselves a ghost story because we were in a place where ghost stories sell. We were there to make an honest documentary, so I made an honest choice. I wrote a little note to myself not to include that row. Another student would love it. I wanted clean story. I wanted morning light making silver of the cut grass and Mrs. Ruiz's hands working like a metronome. We finished the second night, packed up, said goodnight to the peacocks that wander near the lake like extras who can't find their mark, and went back to my apartment. Maya crashed on my couch. Jonah went home to Echo Park with the equipment. I lay awake replaying the name like a song hook you hate but can't shake. We returned 2 afternoons later. I had a plain list of B-roll to get. Hoses, sprinklers, the embroidered stitching on staff jackets, tire marks from the backhoe, faded flags, A visitor leaving flowers and how long they stood before kneeling. I lined up the same center stone because I wanted to prove to myself we were silly. The plate now said Helen Jared, not Helena, not Eleanor. The last name had sprouted an extra R. The dates were the same. The font was the same. The small scratch on the lower right corner was in the same place as my photos from 2 and 4 days ago. I didn't record that shot. I didn't say anything to Maya because she was talking to a woman who was there for her uncle, and I didn't want to interrupt grief. I also didn't say anything to Jonah because he was in one of his moods about lav mics and the school's supply of chewed foam. I told myself not to make it a thing. That evening after we wrapped, I went home and pulled up the footage. I paused on my white balance test from night 1 and then night 2. I zoomed in until pixels became squares and the letters still read what I remembered. I tried to find evidence it was different plates, different stones, anything. The patina swirls were identical. I held my finger up to the screen edge to match the little erosion lines. I don't have a green screen and I wouldn't fake it anyway. That's when I thought, okay, I'll ask. Not in a dramatic way, just practical. So on our next day, I found Mrs. Ruiz near the maintenance shed and asked how often families change plates. She paused, then said it happens, but not often. Usually when there's vandalism or damage or when a spouse gets added. She asked why and I said I was curious. She said I should talk to the office if I needed records. The way she looked at me when she said records told me she'd heard the question asked for the same reason before. On the 4th day, the woman in the office who had processed our permit looked up Jared, and then looked up at me with the careful politeness of someone who knows things you do not. She said there was a plot with 2 interments in the section I described, but no notes on plate changes. She printed me a little map with a pencil mark and said it might help me keep track. I took that paper and felt the weird teenage sensation of being caught doing something I didn't know was wrong. The office smelled like old paper syrup, like a library that also sells kindly lies. I want to be clear because the next part isn't the dramatic turn some of you want it to be. There was no shadow figure. There was no whisper in my ear. There was just careful filmmaking and a pragmatic decision to keep going. If there was a story, it was about work and memory and how we maintain both. The name thing was an itch I tried not to scratch, but the itch kept growing. After the 4th day, I started noticing it in other places. A mausoleum plaque that read Morton Lee became Martin Lee the next day, then Morton Lee, as if someone was sliding letters around like little tiles on a board. A set of family markers with flowers. The same silk lilies each time shifted from Sant'Angelo to Sant'Angelo and back again, like a mouth trying different sounds. Maya saw the Morton Martin one herself and stopped pretending I was making it up. Jonah still said plates get replaced. He also started bringing backup SD cards. We began building the phenomenon into the project. Reluctantly, like you include a B story you don't love because it's happening in the room. I went back to the office and the woman, her name was Diane, I learned, was polite but firm. She said vandalism happens. She said weather wears. She said things get repaired. I asked if repairs ever happened between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. because that's when we saw changes.
She said no.
Victor the guard shrugged when I asked him if he'd noticed anything. He said people come at night even when the gates are closed. He said sometimes they hop fences to impress each other and leave with grass stains. He said raccoons can move things you don't think small hands can move. I am not someone who scares easily. I'm not brave either. I just do the thing in front of me because it's due. We were due for our last night of dusk access. It was a Friday. Light wind, low cloud that made the sky the color of a bright t-shirt that's been washed too many times. The peacocks were already roosting when we arrived. Jonah set the recorder levels and did a little clap for sync because the clapperboard we'd checked out had wandered off with some other student. We shot over by the lake and then near the tall old stones whose names are sometimes famous and sometimes ordinary, and sometimes both. I looked for the Helena Eleanor Helen row and found it easily because my feet remembered. The center plate now read Alina Jarrett. It was like the name was being worn down to a smooth, undecided thing. We planned to capture a time-lapse of the sky dimming over the stones, and then pack up. I set the tripod firm. I double-checked that I'd turned off in-camera stabilization for the time-lapse, because the last thing I needed was the camera trying to be helpful and making things worse. Maya sat on a little folding stool and started recording audio for atmosphere. You can always do ADR for drama, but you can't fake the particular traffic pattern of Melrose on a Friday evening. or the way sprinklers click before they spit. Jonah did a slow track along the path to catch the glow of candles people had left that day. He always says you should never film fire recklessly. It's an old joke. He respects small flames. I started the time lapse and watched the first few frames to be certain the exposure ramping was behaving. There was a slight shift in my frame on the right edge, a sliver of something pale. I adjusted the legs and the sliver vanished. Maya whispered about the way the wind sounded in the ficus. Jonah tapped my shoulder and pointed toward the office building where a couple stood talking to Diane with that exact posture of people about to ask if they can stay after closing. The peacock screamed once, which always sounds like a person somewhere else in trouble, and then settled. When the mosquitoes got bold, we walked the time-lapse area in circles to keep them confused. That's when I saw the first new name. A fresh-looking stone we hadn't filmed before sat near a low juniper. It belonged to someone my age, 24, who died in 1999. The name was Lauren Park. I registered the sad math of it, thought about their parents, moved on. Across the path, a family stone for the Devereaux line had a tiny chipped corner I liked for texture. I noted it, moved on. We got back to the time-lapse camera and Maya asked if I'd moved the tripod. I hadn't. She asked because the right edge of the frame had a sliver again, the pale shape returning like a tide under a door. I adjusted the legs again, annoyed with myself for rushing. I started the time-lapse anew because I'm a perfectionist about the wrong things. The pale sliver came back, then widened. It was the edge of a stone we hadn't left that close to our tripod. The tripod was steady. I put my hand on it and felt the vibration of my own blood, nothing else. I stepped around to see which stone it was, and I'm embarrassed to tell you I stepped with this exaggerated care, like the ground might scold me for not paying attention earlier. The stone was new to me, a simple upright white marble that stood a little crooked, like a person who had paused mid-apology. The name at the top read Laura Park, not Lauren. Laura. Maybe there are two in the cemetery. That is possible. I turned to check the flat marker near the juniper. It still said Lauren. I'm not dumb. I know Laura and Lauren are different names. I also know nobody was in that path between the two names in the few minutes we'd been here. We had enough and we all knew it without saying it. There is a feeling you get when footage turns to evidence of something you didn't go to record. It's like you're at someone's house and they take a phone call in another room and you don't mean to overhear. But you do. And the conversation is not about you, but the air in the room somehow is. Jonah said he had 15 minutes of clean ambient sound. Maya said she'd finish her thermos in the car. I checked the time. It was 6:56 p.m. Victor would start his sweep at 7. I went to the tripod to stop the time lapse. I don't know why I glanced back at the white stone as I did it, but that's the piece I replay in my head because that one extra second became a different shape of time. The stone now read, Lauren Park, the extra N back, as if it never left. I've cut enough to know what you accuse me of. You think I looked away and someone switched it. You think there were two stones. You think I wanted this to happen, so I saw it happen. I've accused myself of those things too. I pulled the SD card, put it in a little hard case, and refused to check the footage on the camera. I have rules about backups. I put the case in the small interior zip pocket of my backpack. I knew where that pocket was because I'd repaired the zipper pull myself with a little twist of wire. I tell you this so you understand how much I notice small physical details when I need to. The next day we didn't go back. It was Saturday and a heat haze made the city look like glossy candy under an oven light. I stayed home, scrubbed through the time-lapse, and watched the sky go deeper, then purple, then dark. I watched the sliver appear at the frame edge and do something I cannot describe without sounding uncareful. It didn't slide in. It didn't jump. The rightmost few pixels simply started belonging to a different arrangement, like when you're adjusting a color grade and accidentally slide a slider too far, and the whole skin tone goes strange all at once. Not a transformation. A replacement. That's what the edge of my frame did. There was no shadow. There was no motion blur. One moment it was empty path and the next it was an edge. And then when I toggled the playhead, another arrangement. I scrolled through frame by frame until I saw letters. The letters were not visible enough to read on the time lapse. I tried sharpening, adding contrast, anything. I gave up and watched all of it through twice, trying to feel like an editor instead of whatever this new version of me is. On Monday, I emailed my professor that we needed one last night. Not a whole night, just an hour. I said our light was bad and we had some noisy audio. It wasn't entirely a lie. She said yes because she always says yes if you ask politely and have a plan. We went back on Tuesday near sunset. Victor nodded at us. He asked how our movie was turning out and used the word movie like a joke that still feels good to tell. He pointed out a part of the path that had sunk a little and told us to watch our ankles. The air tasted like oleander and dust. The peacocks were quiet. I brought chalk, not the white kind kids draw hopscotch with, which would feel like screaming in a library, but a light gray artist's chalk you can use to do rubbings without leaving a circus behind. Chalk on paper. You can capture the letters from plates and compare in a way that photographs can make slippery. We had a plan. We picked 3 stones whose names we'd seen shift. The Helena, Eleanor, Helen center plate, the Morton, Martin plaque on the mausoleum, and the Lauren, Laura upright marble. We did gentle rubbings of all 3, careful not to press too hard because stone is a body and paper is a kind of listening. We dated each sheet. Jonah logged the time down to the minute. Maya took stills from 3 angles for each. We went to the car. We sealed the rubbings in a big manila envelope. We drove around the block singing to the dumbest song on the radio because we needed to hear our own voices come back at us alive. We parked on Santa Monica and ate tacos in the car, laughing like people who conquered nothing but hunger. Then we went back in for one last pass. We told ourselves we were going to get beauty shots for the edit, the B-roll you lay over the credits so your audience leaves with peace instead of questions. I started at the upright marble. It was now Lorraine Parr. The dates were decades different, someone old and well-loved by the number of flower vases. The shape of the letters had the same chisel stroke, the same shallow curves. My spine tried to climb up and away from itself. I didn't do a rubbing. I didn't do anything. Maya, to her credit, put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed twice like a person anchoring a kite. Jonah retreated into his equipment because that's where he knows how to live. He adjusted filters with intense care while we decided nothing at all. We went to the center flat plate. It had returned to Helena Jarrett. Jonah laughed then, a single short laugh that made the peacocks somewhere answer with an echo. He said it's like we're part of the edit and the editor doesn't like us. It was late enough that the office windows were dark. Victor's flashlight flicked at the far end of the path in that comfortable rhythm guards use when they aren't finding anything bad. I told myself that the only thing to do was to finish our last shot and then go home and fall forever into an honest sleep. I set the tripod near the newer graves where the grass grows brighter for a while because the ground has been turned. Maya set the zoom on a short stand and angled the mic toward nothing particular. We like that kind of sound. The hum that tells you your speaker lives in a world. Jonah fiddled. I looked down to adjust the tripod leg that always sticks and saw my name. I hope you understand that I do not mean it like people mean it when they say they saw their future written in the stars or in a fortune cookie. I mean, I saw my full name, first and last, carved into a flat gray face. The stone was standard. The font was standard. The little dash between dates was the same small polite line I'd been rubbing with chalk all week. There was my name. Under it, the date of birth, which was mine. Under that, the date of death. It was 2 months from now. The month and day were correct for the calendar we live inside. The year was this year. I didn't say anything. I forgot how to say anything. The sound at the back of my throat was the sound you make when you've swallowed water wrong and you know it. And you know nothing else. Maya said my name in the regular world voice she uses to bring me back when I'm lost in a shot. Then she followed my eyes. Jonah didn't look right away because he trusts me, and he trusts that if I'm looking at something, it is not small. When he finally turned, he said my name too. Not like the world, like a person making sure he wasn't mispronouncing his friend, like if he got the vowels wrong, he'd undo it. I have the worst instincts sometimes. For example, I wanted very badly to touch the letters. I wanted to do a rubbing with the gray chalk, press my sheet over that awful correctness and pull back and see if the paper said what the stone said. I reached with my hand like an idiot, and Jonah shook his head. Maya shook hers too. Victor's flashlight hit us for a second and then swept on because 3 film kids kneeling doesn't read as trouble. A car drove past on Santa Monica, and a motorcycle backfired, and I remember that because the sound made me jump, and when I jumped, the small stones around the base of my name did that tiny shifting thing stones do when weight changes. It wasn't theatrical. It was a physical proof that something real held that spot on the ground. We did not scream. You'd think we would. We did not run. We stood. I took 3 steps back because I thought some distance would change the effect. Like those optical illusions in books for children. It did not. Maya picked up the zoom in a careful movement that told me she was afraid of dropping it. Not because of the gear, but because you don't set your ear on a thing like this if you want to keep hearing sleep. Jonah put his hand on my elbow and said we should go. We started to. We moved in that way people move in museums when they remember their body again, a little embarrassed to be made of bones. Jonah realized he'd left a spare battery by the path and turned to grab it. He bent, pocketed it, stood, and then his face did something I had not seen it do. He is not an expressive person. He frowns gently and smiles gently and lives in the middle. He went white, not movie white, the kind where all the color leaves your cheeks first as if it knew it had somewhere more important to be. Another stone to the left now held Maya's name. Not the same last name words as mine because we are not related, but the familiar sound of who she is was there in stone. The dates were different. Hers was a week later than mine. The week difference would have been funny if it belonged to anything else. The 3 of us drew a little invisible circle of air around ourselves and stood inside it, almost hand to hand but not. Victor's flashlight found us again and hung there for a heartbeat, like he could sense a crowd in one space. He didn't call out. He was just doing his job. We left then. We left with the smooth politeness you use to leave a room where an argument has just happened, but you weren't part of it. We didn't take the time lapse. We didn't pack methodically. We threw strap over shoulder and cord into bag. Maya held my elbow the way your mother holds you when you're a kid who sleepwalks. We walked toward the car with our backs trying to sprout eyes. The path seemed longer than it should have been, then it was short again. Then our car was there. A short, dark object that smelled like gum and sun-heated plastic. Victor lifted a hand to us and I lifted mine back automatically. He didn't look confused or interested or anything that would help me live. We drove. We didn't speak at first. Maya drove because my hands were not mine. When we reached the next block, Jonah took a deep breath. The kind where you try to fill your lungs all the way to their elastic limit, and said we should talk in a place that isn't moving. We parked in a lit grocery store lot where people were buying milk and cereal, which made me feel like the world was doing its job. We sat, we looked at each other. We said the obvious things in the quiet way you say obvious things when they're not stable anymore. We said, "What did you see?" We said, "I saw it too." We said, "Maybe there's a trick." We said, "Maybe there is some production we don't know about, some mischief, some cruel art piece that uses the names of whoever happens to stand in a certain place at a certain time." We said, "We did not tell anyone our names there tonight except we had, to Victor, to Diane, to Mrs. Ruiz." We said, "But we had never told them our last names." We said, "That doesn't matter. People can know things." We said, "Or there's nothing at all except what we are making of it." I went home. I put the envelope with the rubbings on my kitchen table and turned on only one lamp because the overhead makes my apartment look too much like a set. I washed my hands. I drank water because I think if you can feel temperature in your mouth, you still belong to the part of the day that can be measured. Jonah texted he made it home. Maya texted she was outside my building because she didn't want to go to hers yet. I let her up. We didn't talk about the stone. We watched people we don't know on YouTube explain how to bake bread. The bread rose and fell and rose, and our breathing tried to match it. I slept badly. At 2:12 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand and I looked without wanting to, because I thought it would be the date from the stone. It was a calendar reminder I'd set months ago to back up my footage. The subject line read, "Names cut." I don't title things like that. I keep clean, boring names so archives behave. I stared at the subject and my mind tried to make it logic and couldn't. I deleted the event and then it reappeared. And then it deleted. Once I held my finger steady for the length of a breath, and then the phone decided to sleep without me. In the morning, the chalk rubbings were not what we left them. The handwriting at the top of each sheet, where I'd written the date and time and brief description, was mine until it wasn't. The letters on the chalk rubbings had shifted in the paper. It is impossible. I can hear you. I can hear the sound you make when someone says a thing that breaks the spell of ordinary. But the rubbings had changed. Not dramatically. Not theatrical. They had drifted the same way the plates do. The Helena had become Elen, had become Lena, had become something like Lena, with a little uncertain flick in the A. The Martin was Morton, was Merton, was back to Martin. The Lauren was Laura. Was Laura was there with a stretch of chalk where the U would be if the U wanted it. The dates kept their bones, but not their numbers. It was like the paper had been wiped just enough to be inconvenient. We went to class that afternoon because that's what you do. You go to the next appointed place. I didn't show the new footage. I showed the old days, the ordinary work and the quiet interview with Mrs. Ruiz. Her hands folding and unfolding a pair of gardening gloves as she talked about how you learn the weight of damp grass by the color. My professor smiled at the clean cut. Jonah looked at me sideways and then stared purposefully at the wall so he wouldn't betray anything. Maya moved her foot in a metronome under the chair. After class, Professor Kwan said we had something special if we kept our heads down and didn't make the story about ourselves. That last part landed like a small stone in my pocket. I carried it home without resenting the weight. That night, I did not go back to the cemetery. Instead, I walked to the bodega at the corner and bought a roll of masking tape and a Sharpie. I wrote my name in block letters on a piece of tape and stuck it to the back of my laptop. It felt childish and also like a test. If names are a kind of address, I wanted to see if changing my return address did anything. I know how that sounds. I went to brush my teeth, and in the mirror, the tape was backward, obviously, but the letters themselves were not mine. The E had a little European flourish. The R curled like a cat's tail. I spun around to look at the laptop. The tape read normal. In the mirror, it read something else. I made a tiny noise and then laughed out loud because there are limits to how many little noises you can make at a day. I brushed my teeth. I spit. I watched the water go the right way down. Jonah came by the next afternoon with coffee and 2 extra SD cards because he deals with fear by having duplicates. He said we should back up the time-lapse footage 3 times. We did. We labeled each card carefully. We locked the little tabs on the side so they're read-only. That night, one card had a folder name with a date 2 months from now. It wasn't there in the afternoon. We hadn't created it. Inside the folder was nothing. An empty with a name. You're going to ask if we return to Hollywood forever. We did once more. I asked for permission for an early morning next week around 7 a.m., when the sky is pale enough to show kindness to faces. Diane said okay, and her voice didn't betray anything. We went and everything was ordinary. We filmed Mrs. Ruiz planting new marigolds. She let me film her hands. We filmed a tiny funeral from a respectful distance. Nothing identifiable. Just the shape of people together leaning toward the same point. We filmed a peacock walking like it owns the copyright on the ground. We went to the center stone because I had to. It was Eleanor Jared. We all said the name out loud, maybe to fix it to that hour. We walked to the upright marble. It was Laura Parr. I laughed a little and then swallowed that laugh because the laughter sounded like a car turning over but not catching. We looked for the flat stone with my name. It was not there. There was a small rectangle of bare dirt where grass had been lifted for some other purpose. It did not hold my name anymore. It didn't hold anyone's. Maya said it's like a word you almost say but don't. We left without asking anyone any questions because we were scared of getting a reasonable answer. The end of this, if there is an end, is boring. I know that's not what you want. We turned in the documentary. It is about people who work with memory, how they clean and trim and carry and measure, how they protect visitors from their own bad decisions and make tiny adjustments to keep the place in one piece. It is not a horror short. My professor liked it. We got a good grade. We are not liars. But the footage on those cards, the other footage, sits in 3 places now. On a hard drive with a little sticker of a sunflower. On a second drive in Jonah's closet behind an old jacket he can't throw away because it used to belong to his brother. On a cloud somewhere. Because I gave in and dragged a folder into the sky like any coward who wants to believe that a copy can outrun the thing being copied. Sometimes I play back the time lapse and it plays like a normal time lapse. Sometimes the right edge does that arrangement trick. Once the letters were clear enough in one frame that I could read my full name again. And under it the date shifted forward by 1 day. It was a kindness I did not ask for. People keep telling me to go see someone. A doctor, a priest, a professor of something arcane. I haven't. Not because I think I'm fine. Because I think the only thing I can do is carry this with the same kind of ordinary care. Mrs. Ruiz carries a bag of mulch. You keep your back straight. You don't twist too quickly. You talk to yourself about the weight in terms of numbers, not in terms of what the bag is made of. When I pass the cemetery driving east at dusk now, I look away not out of fear but because I have the feeling of being watched by a very good editor. Names are cuts. Names are how you decide where one scene ends and another begins. My name lives in my mouth when I say it, and on the front of my student ID and in the contact list of people who love me. It has also lived in stone. I know that because I saw it and because I carry a rubbing of it, or rather I carry a piece of paper that says almost what it said. I keep the page pressed inside a book on my shelf, the kind that tells you how to build a story. The paper crinkles when I breathe too close. Some nights when the street outside is loud and my brain is a projector with no off switch, I get up and check the book. The paper always says the same thing until it doesn't. Once the chalk had smudged into an unreadable cloud except for the little dash between dates, the quiet line that means a life has edges. I could read the dash even when I couldn't read the words. It looked like a road. There is one last piece and I don't know where to put it, so I'll put it here. A week after we turned in the dock, I got a thin white envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a cemetery records card. It had the grid numbers and the section name and a line for name of interment, which was blank. In the space for remarks, someone had written in neat block letters, "Do not finalize until date confirmed. It could be a prank." I know how to say those words. But the paper smelled like the office, that old syrup of paper and kindness. I held it up to the light and the watermark was the same kind they use. I put it in the book next to the rubbing. Then I put both in a different book and then another because moving something around sometimes makes you feel like the ground will stay where you need it. When I lay down to try for sleep, my phone on the nightstand showed the time changing minute by minute. The next morning in my notifications there was a screenshot I didn't take. It was of my lock screen at 12:01 a.m., the minute just after. The battery percentage was exactly the same as when I'd closed my eyes. The screenshot file name ended with a letter instead of a number, like a person trying different spellings of their own history. I deleted it. It came back with the letter switched for another. I don't know what it wants. Maybe it wants nothing. Maybe it's like the Stones and it just wants to be arranged in a way that makes sense to itself for a little while. If you go to Hollywood Forever and you find the center plate near the ficus with the mower tracks, will you do me a favor and read the name out loud gently? Just once, the way you'd read a name you care about? Don't tell me what it says. I am doing my best to keep my head down and let the story be about the people who deserve it. But sometimes when the night is quiet, I can hear chalk on paper and a chisel on stone just beyond the part of the room I can see. It doesn't scare me as much as you'd think. It only reminds me that whatever is editing this has not faded to black yet, and that for now the dash between my dates is still being drawn. I don't post much, but I need to put this somewhere that isn't just in my head. If you live in New York, you know how the city swallows things and keeps moving. Like a tide that doesn't care what it drags along. Some memories get eaten that way. This one refuses to go. And I'm tired of waking up at 3 a.m. with the taste of salt and wet soil in my mouth like I'm still there breathing through a damp mask. I got the job on Hart Island after a winter of part-time gigs that never lasted, snow shoveling, loading pallets, patching drywall for a landlord who kept forgetting my name. Through a friend of a friend, I heard the city needed grounds workers for maintenance and restoration, which sounded harmless enough when the posting used words like dignity and stewardship. I knew the basics, same as anyone who grew up around the ferry stops. Hart Island is where the city buries its unclaimed dead.
If you don't have anyone to claim you, or you can't afford a private burial, you're headed to that narrow strip of land off the Bronx, opposite City Island's clam shacks and shiny boats.
The kind of place you might stare at from the end of a pier without really seeing. The first day I met my partner, Luis. He used to work sanitation, then moved up to the Department of Correction when they oversaw the island. Broad shoulders, neat beard, a voice like he'd swallowed gravel and left it there to marinate. His thermos smelled like chocolate and cinnamon because his wife made him Mexican hot chocolate every morning. That part stuck with me for some reason. It felt like an anchor, something warm and ordinary before the cold and the quiet got in. Ms. Carver was our supervisor, mid-50s, clipped sentences, a face built for bad news. "We restore the grounds," she told us on the short ferry ride over. The diesel engine coughing under us and the gulls drifting like scraps of paper. We fix markers, we maintain paths, we correct records when we can. You treat every plot like it belongs to someone you loved, because it did belong to someone loved. They just aren't here to say so. There were 4 of us that day. Me, Luis and two guys who rotated in from another unit. A corrections officer with kind eyes and a tight jawline stood near the bow, radio pinned to his shoulder, scanning the water like he expected trouble from the empty waves. The wind found its way under my jacket no matter how I tucked it, and the air had that brackish bite that sits behind your teeth. Stepping onto the island felt like walking into a boneyard nobody bothered to disguise. Not in a gory way, just... The layout was utilitarian. Straight lines, numbered stakes, narrow roads that stuttered under our boots. The grass was patchy in places, damp and stubborn in others. The houses, small, pale, and exhausted, watched us with blank windows. There are photos online. They make it look like the set of a historical documentary. In person, it's quieter. Even the motor on the backhoe sounded hesitant, like it caught its breath before it spoke. Our task was simple that day. Check a row of flagged plots where the markers had cracked in the winter, and cross-reference them with a printed ledger so the records matched the ground. When I say markers, I don't mean individual headstones. Hard Island holds people in pine boxes stacked in trenches, a trench for infants, separate ones for adults. The markers are the stakes for whole trenches with a number burned into white wood. That's how you navigate it, by lists and numbers. Ms. Carver's clipboard was a rigid second spine along her forearm. Around 10, the sun found a way around the clouds and the fog lightened. We were working a strip near the water, close enough to hear the slurp and slap of the river against the rocks. Luis had the auger, I had the shovel. We dug out the frost-hardened clay around a tilted marker, set it straight and tamped it until it sat like it meant to be there. We didn't talk much. When you did, your voice felt wrong, like it could float away and bother someone. The first strange thing was so small I almost ignored it. The radio on the corrections officer's shoulder crackled and coughed like a sick cat, and then a woman's voice came through clear enough that I glanced up. 4 words, low and tired and practical. You're digging in the wrong place. It wasn't our channel. The officer frowned, tapped his radio, and asked for a repeat. Nothing. Just static and the slow, watery hush of nearby reeds leaning into each other. He shook his head and went back to his slow orbit, keeping an eye on us like he always did. Luis stopped for a second with his hand on the auger handle. What did she say? She told him we're wrong, I said, because I hadn't figured out how else to frame it. Wrong hole, Luis snorted. Then she hasn't met Carver. He meant it as a joke and let it go. Ms. Carver didn't even look up. Her face had that cement smoothness that told you she heard, but decided the information wasn't heavy enough to lift. By lunch, the wind was up again, pushing the smell of salt and damp grass into our bread, into the creases of our gloves. I walked away from the others for a minute, to the edge of the slope where the grass gave up to rocks. City Island sat across the water like a postcard, bright boats rocking, the whine of a plane far above stitching the sky. There's a bench up there, not fancy, just municipal metal with flaking paint. I ate half a sandwich and texted my sister, Danny. She likes weird city facts, and even though I knew better than to take pictures, I told her where I was working. She sent back a skull emoji and then, "Are you okay?" I told her I was fine, which was true except for the way my ribs felt knitted too tight. That afternoon we were rechecking records from 1985. A line in the ledger with a smudged number that didn't match the stake. The ledger said one trench, the stake insisted on another. "We'll expose just enough," Miss Carver said. We took turns. The soil here was stubborn and pebbly and kept it cold it had no business keeping under a sun like that. We dug with hands after a shallow scrape because you don't cut wood you don't have to cut. Dirt crawled under my nails I thought I'd scrubbed clean 100 times since. Luis was telling me about a Mets game he took his nephew to when the ground changed tone. I don't have a better way to say it. The soil had been making this steady shush against my gloves, and then it was like pressing my ear to the mouth of a jar, hollow and close all at once. I glanced at Luis and he gave me the same look back. A quick narrowing of eyes like we'd both heard a key turn in a door we didn't know was there. "Stop," he said. We froze, hands buried. Another second passed. A gull screamed and its voice got eaten by the wind. It would have been nothing if not for the way that hollowness hovered beneath us. Not the sound itself, but the suggestion of sound. Like the hold your breath before a person swallows. Then it came. A low sob you could think you imagined, except it had shape and edges. The sound of someone trying not to make a sound. Not dramatic, not movie loud. The smallest little weeping, pressed through the earth like a secret that got tired of being buried. I want to be clear here. I'm not the kind of person who jumps to ghosts. My mother raised us Catholic and practical, the type who looks for the fuse box before candles. I told myself we were hearing some weird way the wind moved through the rocks or the hollow between trenches. I told myself anything before I let the thought of a human sound under my hand find its way in. I took my hand out of the soil and so did Luis, like we were synchronizing without thinking. He swallowed and said in a voice weirdly polite, "Hello?" The crying stopped. Another sound replaced it, the soft push of breath you hear when someone leans in to tell you a secret. A faint, close whisper so near it was like the ground under us had a mouth pressed against it. "You're digging in the wrong place." We both flinched, even though it wasn't loud. The words weren't even angry. They sounded inconvenienced. Like a nurse telling you gently that you wrote the date wrong on a form. Luis made the sign of the cross so fast I barely saw it. His eyes found the corrections officer and he lifted his hand in that small wave that says without saying, "Can you come here?" When the officer arrived, we were still kneeling, hands hovering over dirt like we had to hold it down. "What's up?" he asked. I hated how my voice came out thin and young. "There's someone under here." He frowned, his gaze darting to the stake, to Ms. Carver, back to our hands. "You got a pocket radio? Sometimes the audio bounces funny." "I don't," I said. I didn't have anything on me besides the shovel and my phone. Luis put his ear near the soil. He closed his eyes. I did the same, even though part of me didn't want to. The wind ran the long grass beside us, and the ferry engine muttered where it was tied up distant. The island is never silent. It just has a way of making its sounds feel like they belong to it, not you. At first I thought I'd made it up, then the whisper again, as real as someone cupping their hands and leaning into the crack between two doors. "Wrong place." I jerked back like I'd been tapped. The officer's jaw tightened. "Stand up," he said quietly. "Both of you, Ms. Carver?" Ms. Carver came over with that measured walk of someone walking across ice they trust. We explained, stumbling, interrupting each other. Her expression didn't change except for a small crease between her eyebrows that hadn't been there before. She crouched and held her ear near the hole. For a long, horrible minute, nothing. Just the fuss of the reeds and the tick of the little orange flag on the stake nudging itself against the pole. Even I felt stupid. Then I watched the skin around Ms. Carver's eyes loosen, watched her hold her breath, watched something like grief pass across her face faster than a blink. She stood and said, "Mark this. We'll compare records again. Don't dig further right now." "Ma'am," Luis said, voice rough. "Did you hear?" "I heard the wind," she said, but softer than the denial deserved. She clicked her pen and circled a number and moved on, but her shoulders carried something she hadn't planned on lifting that day. The officer lingered. He was younger than he looked at first glance. He said like he wanted to sound sure and couldn't quite get there. "Acoustics are weird. She's right. Don't dig." We didn't. We moved to another stake, and another, pretending our hands didn't want to dig backward into the one we'd left behind. Nobody talked about it. Luis made jokes about the Mets. One of the rotating guys asked me if I'd ever tried the chowder on City Island. The ferry horn blew once, flat and indifferent, like it was wiping the slate clean. That night I got off the bus at Pelham Bay and walked to where City Island Road narrows, where you can look across the water and pretend you can see the individual blades of grass. The island was a dark smudge. A chill settled in that didn't leave when the subway door shut, or when I stepped into my apartment that smelled like last night's garlic. I warmed my hands around tea I didn't drink. Danny called and told me a story about her neighbor's cat that never jumps, but jumped onto her balcony rail like it had been waiting all along. I didn't tell her about Hart. I told myself it was because I didn't want to worry her, but really I was afraid the words would make it real in a way that wouldn't let me sleep. The next morning the city wore a gray shawl and kept it, fog hemming in the sound of our boots. We were assigned back to the same section with a notation in red pen on our clipboard. Luis's eyes met mine over the paper. We didn't say anything, and that felt like saying everything we needed to say. We started on the far end and worked inward. Twice as the fog thinned, the radio coughed a little. "Control?" the officer said. "You stepping on our channel?" They weren't. The whispers didn't come through the radio that day. They came from below, closer and less patient every time. "Not here," the voice said once when my shovel teased the edge of a different trench. "Left," it said another time. and Luis and I froze like we might catch it if we didn't move. We told Miss Carver again. She added another neat circle to another number. "We will address this in the records," she said, and the way she emphasized the word made me feel like we had invited something to the table that didn't always sit with us. Just before lunch, the sky broke. It wasn't sunshine exactly. The gray thinned to a lighter gray, water taking a breath between waves. I had my hands in a shallow hole around a stake that insisted with its stamped number that 1985 adult burials belonged here. The ledger said 1987 infants, and I knew enough by then to feel that mismatch like a cold finger along my neck. The others were spread out. Even the gulls seemed to pull away from us, circling over the far end of the island where the old buildings slumped into themselves. I leaned in. I don't know why. Maybe because the whisper had stopped for a whole hour, and I wanted to prove to myself that silence could be a mercy. My lips were close enough to the soil that if I breathed out, I'd have sent a little puff of dust spiraling away. I said because it felt like the most decent thing I could do. "Where then?" There's a special kind of fear that comes when the thing you're scared of is polite back. The whisper didn't do anything dramatic. It didn't shriek or hiss. A woman's voice, level and low, said, "Walk 15 steps toward the cedar. 10 steps toward the water. 2 feet down. I'm cold, please, not here." I stood up so fast my knees popped. Luis came to my side and didn't even ask. He saw my face and knew. The corrections officer watched us with an unreadable expression, one hand on his radio, one hand on the brim of his cap like he was holding it to keep his thoughts from leaving. We counted together. 15 to the cedar that leaned like an old man, 10 toward the water where the river breathed out damp. We looked at Ms. Carver. She looked at us. Her mouth tightened, but she nodded. "Just a test. Expose, don't open. If we're wrong, we're wrong. If we're right, we correct." I dug with my hands. Luis used the small trowel we kept for delicate work. The soil felt different here, less compacted, more eager to give. At about a foot, my knuckles scraped wood, pine, rough and raw against the skin where dirt had already chewed me up. A thin cry of surprise left me before I could stop it. At 2 feet, we saw the edge of a lid, the dull silver of a nail. Luis's throat worked. He set the trowel down like it was an offering. We stopped. We were careful. We covered it back. We marked the spot. Ms. Carver wrote numbers with a hand that wanted to shake and wouldn't allow itself. The officer called it in and used words that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't there. Discrepancy, confirm, record variance. On the ferry back, nobody talked the way you talk after a funeral, where voices feel like they can rub against a bruise you can't see. That night I dreamed the island was a green blanket, and the river tucked it in. The ferry horn, a mother's voice calling you when dinner is ready. I woke up gasping, my mouth full of that damp taste again, and checked my phone like the clock could tell me something besides the time. 3:11, of course, the time all bad thoughts put on their work boots and get started. You could argue we'd found exactly what you'd expect to find on Hart Island. A box where a box should be. You could argue the numbers got mixed up and the voice was just our brains making a shape out of static. I tried to argue that with myself and sometimes aloud. To Luis on the ferry when he stared at the water like he was waiting for a face to break the surface. He didn't think I was crazy. He didn't think he was either. He shrugged and said the thing he always said when he'd reached the edge of a reason. "It is what it is." He added quietly, "But I'm bringing my priest cousin a coffee and asking him what he thinks. Just in case." We went back the next day with an inspector who wore a tie that the wind kept trying to blow off. He asked neat, pointed questions, checked our measurements, tried to keep his face arranged into skepticism, and kept missing. He knelt and pressed his ear to the soil. He didn't hear anything. His relief was so obvious it made me feel sorry for him. We reopened the shallow scrape, exposed the corner of the pine again. He nodded, wrote something down, said it would be clarified, which is another good city word that means it would be made to look right on paper. When the inspector left and the ferry cough settled in its lines, the island went quiet again. That heavy quiet that feels like someone throwing a blanket over your head. I went back to the first hole, the not here hole, even though nobody told me to. I knelt. The grass pressed a damp pattern into my jeans. I put my ear to the soil and waited until the pounding in my blood stepped back enough to let other sounds through. I whispered. We moved. Is that better? For a long time, nothing. And in that nothing was an entire universe where I had made this all up. I could have lived there. I almost did. Then the soil breathed under my cheek in the tiniest lift, the way you feel subway rumble before you hear it. The voice came, lighter now, as if a weight had been taken off it, as if it had uncurled a bit. "Thank you," it said, "but it isn't just me." I felt my stomach fall. "What do you mean?" The wind shushed a long blade of grass against the stake like a turning page. "Not here," the voice said gently, the words drawing out over the span of my breath. "All over." I wanted to be done then. I wanted to stand and go count stakes and compare numbers and tilt my head and play by the rules of the city that put everything in boxes, even the people. But the thing about hearing a voice from under the ground is that it rearranges the hierarchy of your responses. You can pretend you didn't for the rest of your life, you can. But you know, I told Ms. Carver. She listened. She didn't sigh or tell me to take a break. She took her pen and added another note to the column that governed the rest. She looked, old for 1 second, and then that was gone, replaced by the steel I'd first seen on the ferry. "We work row by row," she said. "We check. We correct what we can. We're not here to chase shadows, we're here to get it right." We worked, days in a row. The voice didn't come every day. Sometimes I thought I caught the faintest suggestion and it was wind, or the creak of a tree's slow complaint. Sometimes it came as clear as someone talking through a door. Not dramatic, not threatening. Patient, precise, tired. Once, when I asked for a name, silence. Once, when I said I'm sorry, the softest little laugh that wasn't cruel, wasn't even amused. More like a well, of course, because what else would you say? I started taking the early bus, sitting by the window watching the sky lift itself over Pelham Bay Park, while people yawned into their coffee cups. Danny noticed my texts got shorter. She sent me a link to a story about the island and asked if that was the place. I typed yes and deleted it and typed almost and deleted that too. I told her work was fine. She sent back a string of emojis that ended with a lighthouse. Don't ask me why the lighthouse got me, but it did. I thought of that beam of light sweeping and sweeping even when nobody looks. One morning a drizzle made the world around us porous. The ferry's deck was slick. The gulls were standoffish. The officer wore a hood this time and his voice echoed oddly inside it when he told us the forecast. We were assigned a new section near a line of cedars. The smell there was richer, darker. Pine and wet dirt and something sweet like old wood warmed by the hint of sun behind the clouds. We found 2 more mismatches that week. Nothing huge, nothing scandal-ready. Not rows dug in the wrong place, not dramatic errors, little things that add up. A stake number that had weathered into a cousin of itself. A ledger line smudged by a hand that didn't imagine we'd need to parse it 3 decades later. Maybe a storm, maybe a shift. Maybe just the island doing what islands do, changing slowly and pretending they haven't. And sometimes gently, helpfully, insistently the voice. It wasn't always the same words. Once it said, "A little to the right." Another time, "Not that year." The closest it came to emotion was when I arrived one day with hands that shook because I hadn't slept and it said, "You should rest." So fast I startled, like being reminded by a stranger that my shoelace was untied. I kept thinking, I would see a shape to it, like all the spots where it spoke would draw a line if you looked from high enough up. That's how my brain works. Connect, hypothesize, repeat. But grief doesn't grid itself for your convenience, and neither does an island built for what the city doesn't want to look at. It remained what it was, a voice that wanted something, very small and very specific, done, with a patience that made my hands move gentler than they had before. The inspector returned with a second inspector. They spoke to us the way officials do when they want to believe you're wrong and fear you might be right. They did their own small test digs for confirmation and found what we found. One of them made a phone call using words that folded into each other, like if he wrapped them tightly enough they wouldn't be able to get out and tell a story. On Friday, Luis's cousin came by the ferry dock, collar peeking over his jacket, cheeks red from the wind. He handed Luis a coffee and nodded to me like I'd been added to a congregation by accident. He didn't step onto the ferry. "I'll say a prayer from here," he said, like the water between us was a veil he didn't want to lift. Names matter. He looked down, embarrassed, and then up again, and I felt something lighten in my chest in a way I hadn't since the first day. That evening, the city glowed damp under streetlights. I went back to my apartment and stood by the window watching the smears of car headlights drag themselves along the avenues. The radiator hissed. The hallway outside pulsed to somebody's playlist. I thought about taking a shower to peel the day off me. Instead, I sat on the floor and listened to the way the building hummed around me. I fell asleep there and woke with a stiff neck and a text from Danny asking if I wanted to meet for pancakes Sunday. I wrote yes so fast it felt like a confession. I wish I could end this with a clean moral. I wish I could tell you we found a ledger error that explained everything, or that we discovered a prankster, or that my brain finally grew tired and stopped making voices out of wind. None of those are true, or they're all true in some way that doesn't matter to the part of me that knelt in damp grass and put my ear to soil and felt breath move through the ground. On my last week assigned to Heart, I took a different job. After, not because of fear, so I told myself, but because an offer came and I took it, and that's the story I repeat when people ask. I walked to the Cedar without anyone asking me to. The air had that brittle brightness that February sometimes gives you, like glass that hasn't shattered yet. The ferry engine coughed. The officer stood near the ramp, looking toward the Bronx like his eyes could cross the water and make it shorten. I knelt. My jeans soaked immediately. My gloves smelled like wet rope. I didn't have a prayer exactly. I had questions that would make no sense said aloud. I put my ear down and listened to nothing for a long time. I nearly stood up when the voice came, so faint I could have mistaken it for the last exhale of my own breath. "We are here," it said. Not I. We. We are here. It didn't ask for anything that time. It didn't correct me. It didn't tell me left or right. It simply said the thing that keeps every city standing. A claim, a presence, a truth that insists on itself. We are here. I stood up, stiff and wet and stupidly close to tears. Louise watched me and didn't ask. Ms. Carver clicked her pen and called out the next line of numbers. We worked until the ferry horn reminded us that the city never waits. 2 weeks after I left, I woke at 3 a.m. Then the damp taste was in my mouth again, and the room held that heavy quiet. You only notice when you're listening for a breath next to you and there isn't one. I went to the kitchen and stood over the sink and put my palms on the counter like I needed the feel of something solid to stay upright. I didn't hear anything. I didn't have to. In the morning, Danny texted me a photo she'd taken from City Island. It was a gray smear of shore, and a line of cedars, and sky the color of a lost postcard. She wrote, "Thought of you. Weird, right?" And because I'm learning to tell the truth tiny piece by tiny piece, I wrote back, "Not weird. Thank you." Then I stared at the picture until the pixels became blocks and the blocks became a shape my brain decided meant cedar. I put the phone down and made coffee and burned the toast and laughed because it felt like a thing a living person does. I haven't been back. Sometimes on the subway I catch a whiff of cold earth when a door opens at a stop near Pelham Bay, and my ribs knit tight again. Sometimes I wake up certain I can hear gulls, even though I live far enough from water that any gull that finds me is a lost soul itself. I check the time more than I used to. The clocks never do anything but the thing clocks do. They tell me what time it is, and then they do it again, and they never tell me the thing I actually want to know, which is this. If I put my ear to any patch of ground long enough, would I hear the same whisper? Is the island the only one, or is the whole city a kind of heart where the forgotten press their mouths to the undersides of our streets and say, "Not here, not yet, a little to the left, thank you"? I don't know. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe it was enough to move my hands gentler and count more carefully and accept that sometimes the work is listening, then doing the small exact thing the voice asks. The last thing the voice said to me, not the "we are here," but the very last, came on a day when the wind roared so hard the ferry rope whined and the officer stood with his hand on the cap again, like he was holding his thoughts down. I had my ear to the soil, waiting for a left or a right or a year. What I got was almost a joke. So soft I thought I'd dreamed it until I saw Luis's eyebrow rise the same way mine did. "You're digging in the wrong place," she murmured, and then after one tiny breath with a small kindness that made the hair on my arm stand, "But you're listening in the right one." I still don't know what to do with that. I tell myself stories. Sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. But I have this one, and it doesn't seem to want to be swallowed by the tide. So I'm leaving it here, where strangers gather to say the things that don't sit quiet and pretend it makes a difference. If you find yourself near City Island some morning, and you look across at a strip of land that keeps its own counsel, know this much. Somebody there is still counting. Somebody there is saying a name you'll never hear. And if you press your ear to the cold earth anywhere and you listen long enough, you might hear not a demand but a direction, not a threat but a correction, patient as rain. You might not, and if you don't, consider yourself lucky. Or maybe consider yourself left alone for now. Either way, if you ever pick up a shovel, even for something ordinary, a garden bed, a fence post, just pause before you start. Count 15 toward the cedar you can't see, 10 toward the water you forgot you live beside. Then take a breath and put your hands in gently, like you expect someone to breathe back. If your neighbor asks what you're doing, tell them the truth in whatever piece you can manage. If they laugh, smile. If they don't, maybe ask them to listen too. And if one night you wake with a damp taste on your tongue and no reason for it, don't panic. You can make coffee. You can burn the toast. You can stand at your window and watch the city blink, knowing that somewhere the earth is whispering to itself in a voice that's almost a laugh, almost a sigh. Entirely what it is. Not here, not there. Somewhere a little to the left. Somewhere you'll find if you keep listening.